Good evening. I'd like to call the Board of Selectmen meeting to order for Tuesday evening, February 16th, 2021. This meeting is being held remotely as an alternate means of public access pursuant to an order issued by the Governor of Massachusetts dated March 12, 2020, suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law. You are hereby advised that this meeting and all communications during this meeting may be recorded by the Town of Hingham in accordance with the open meeting law. If any participant wishes to record this meeting or take photographs during this meeting, please notify the chair at this time in accordance with Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 20F, so that the chair may inform all other participants of said recording. If anyone is recording this in any way, I see Mr. Cedrone from WATD is recording the meeting. Thank you, Mr. Cedrone, for letting us know. Is there anyone else who intends to record or take photographs during this meeting? If so, please identify yourself at this time by using the raised hand function. Okay, seeing none, the first item of business on the board's agenda this evening is the approval of the minutes for January 21st, 2020. Joe and Bill, are you ready to move ahead with the approval of minutes?
I am ready to proceed, and I'll move to approve the minutes dated January 21, 2021.
I would second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, Joe?
Aye.
Bill?
Aye.
Mary? Aye. Thank you very much. The next item of business on the agenda is the consideration and potential vote regarding the appointment of Police Chief candidate David P. Jones. Over the past 2 months, the board has received feedback from employees and citizens about both the process we have undertaken to select a new police chief and recommendations for who to select. We have carefully considered all the input and appreciate everyone who took the time to share their thoughts and their perspective. We also received citizen input as to questions to ask the candidate in the public interview, which took place 3 weeks ago, and which were the basis for many of the interview questions asked by my colleagues and myself. Thank you to our fellow citizens for submitting these questions. And since that public interview took place 3 weeks ago, the board has received additional citizen feedback, which we have also considered. This evening, the board will consider making an appointment of a new police chief. Since there have been many opportunities for public input over the past 2 months, we will not be taking additional public comment this evening, but the public is more than welcome to listen to the discussion by the board. I'd like to first turn it over to Town Administrator Tom Mayo, who will provide the board and the public with a recap of the process that has led us to this evening's possible vote. Tom?
Great. Thank you, Mary. Okay, so tonight we are proceeding pursuant to Chapter 263 of the Acts of 2016, which is an act of the Massachusetts State Legislature governing the actions of the town administrator of the town of Hingham. State law requires that the town administrator coordinate the recruitment and screening of suitable candidates for the chief of police, and that the town administrator present the relevant material to the Board of Selectmen for the evaluation of candidates and for the Board of Selectmen to make the appointment decision. So pursuant to the state law, I have coordinated the recruitment and screening of suitable candidates for consideration by the Board of Selectmen. To this end, in December, I posted internally a job posting for the position of police chief. I received one application of a qualified candidate, Interim Chief David Jones. I then organized an interview of this candidate by a panel of 3 independent Massachusetts police chiefs from the towns of Canton, Marshfield, and Dedham. Upon completion of this panel's review process, the panel provided me with a written summary of the outcome. The panel's review was overwhelmingly positive and resulted in an overall rating of very good to excellent, with the panel further stating that they collectively and, quote, without reservation, are pleased to recommend David Jones as the full-time permanent police chief for the town of Hingham. I have further presented the board with relevant material for the evaluation of this candidate, including all application materials, including references, summary of the police chief's review panel, correspondence from the public regarding this hiring process, and the police chief job description. The decision to recruit an internal candidate was consistent with the recommended practice for towns of our size where strong internal candidates exist. As I stated at the Selectmen's meeting on December 15th, and consistent with the Act, should the board decline to appoint a candidate represented to them as a result of this internal search, an external search would commence and candidates be presented to them until one is appointed. In addition to the material previously described, a detailed background check of Interim Chief Jones was performed by an outside agency. The results of the background check produced no cause for concerns. Finally, the selection process was benefited by being able to observe David Jones acting as interim chief for a period of 6 months. This week, I completed an employee performance review of Interim Chief Jones's conduct, work product, and achievements during his tenure as an interim chief. My performance review found that Interim Chief Jones met or exceeded all aspects of the job requirement of police chief.
And Tom, before I invite my colleagues to make any remarks, I would ask you in your capacity as the town administrator for the town, if you have a recommendation for tonight's vote for the board to consider.
I do. Thank you, Mary. So I've reviewed all of the material, including David Jones's personnel files. I've gone over all of the reports of all of the chiefs, et cetera, and it is without hesitation that I make a very strong recommendation that David Jones be appointed as Hingham's next police chief.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to invite my colleague Joe Fisher to make any remarks.
Sure. Before I do, I was getting an echo. I was hearing an echo when Tom was speaking. Is there an echo now when I'm speaking? No. Okay.
No, I don't hear one.
Great. So the Board of Selectmen takes its responsibilities very seriously. And speaking for myself, I view the appointment of a police chief as one of the most consequential appointments I'll be making during my term as a selectman. In many ways, the police department needs to embody the values and culture of our town. And the police chief sets the tone and establishes the standards for the ongoing operation of the department and its officers. When I evaluate a candidate, I ask if the candidate is qualified. I look to see if the candidate has the broad experience in policing that includes both operations, patrol investigations, and administrative assignments, including personnel management, internal affairs, planning, and budget. And I assess whether the candidate's record demonstrates accomplishment, initiative, and problem-solving skills. I evaluate input from members of the community, from police officers, and from town officials. And I rely heavily on the work and due diligence efforts of our town administrator, who is tasked with presenting us with the necessary information required for us to evaluate a candidate. And I consider my own personal experience with the candidate. And with this candidate, David P. Jones, I have been very impressed. He has demonstrated diligence, compassion, and initiative. And he has shown a willingness to learn and an ability to grow. He is, in my view, an officer who is dedicated to his community. One recent example that stands out for me happened in the aftermath of the storming of the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. The local synagogue here in Hingham, Congregation Shirei Shalom, received warnings about possible dangers to its building from anti-Semitic and white supremacist organizations. Interim Chief Jones responded by reassuring the clergy, by increasing patrols in the synagogue area, and by asking his officers who prepare the reports in their cars to do so while parked in the synagogue's parking lot. David's statements of support and his actions of support confirmed for me his commitment to protect the interests of all of us in the community. I fully support the candidacy of David P. Jones to be our next police chief. But before I yield the floor, I have one question that either Tom or the police chief, the interim police chief, can answer. The P in David P. Jones, does that stand for Perry?
It does, yes.
It does. Just doing what I can to try to embarrass you in front of your officers. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mission accomplished. Bill Ramsey.
So Joe, thank you for your comments and thank you for this opportunity, Mary. You know, when I was thinking about this appointment tonight, I was thinking back to the police chiefs that, you know, I've worked with over the years and I grew up with. Guys like Oscar Beck, Ray Campbell, Chief Borowski, Steve Carlson, Tab Mills, Mike Carreno, Glenn Olson. And all of those chiefs shared two common denominators. One was that they cared deeply for our community. And secondly, was that they became a fabric and a part of our community. And I'm very confident that Dave is going to continue that legacy. For those of you that don't know, I've known Dave for, I'd say about 40 years, maybe longer than that. Known him since the second grade. And we grew up together. We went to high school together. When we were in high school, Dave was one of the smartest guys in our class. And I graduated. We were Eagle Scouts together. And then many years later, I was an assistant district attorney trying a case at Hingham District Court, a case that was not a very complex case, but I remember Dave testifying. He was on the stand for about 4 or 5 hours under cross-examination by an excellent defense counsel. And during the entire time, he was so poised, respectful, and professional. And you know, I thought back to that time today in making this decision, and I'm just thrilled to support the nomination of Dave Jones, and I know that he will live on to the great legacy of the great chiefs we've had in the Hingham Police Department.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you, Joe. My colleagues have mentioned many things that come to my mind, and I appreciate that both of you have been able to put into words so effectively a lot of thoughts that have been running through my head. In thinking about this evening, I reflected a lot on the feedback that we received from different people. And Tom has mentioned that the interview panel had enthusiastically supported Dave Jones' candidacy. I would just point out that in the letter the board received, Dave was evaluated in the areas of budget and financial administration, personnel administration, supervisor and leadership, staff development, public relations, employee and labor relations, knowledge of new police reform law, operations during COVID, interpersonal communication skills, ethics in policing, concepts of community policing, school safety, and interactions with Board of Selectmen, town administrator, and other government officials, and overall impressions. And to me, that very broad depth of questioning and the ensuing recommendation speaks very highly. I just also like to read a few quotes from letters of recommendation, unsolicited letters of recommendation that the board received with respect to this candidacy. Quote, "He has proven to be consistently adept at balancing the town's high service level expectations while addressing the impacts of collective bargaining, headcount dynamics, shift assignments, overtime management, personnel development, succession planning, and force morale. I have also interfaced with Chief Jones in my capacity as a part-time volunteer in the Veterans Services Department. Chief Jones has consistently supported veterans-related events." Another letter of recommendation. "I have worked with him for years and have had the opportunity to observe him as he has taken on increasing leadership roles at the police department. I have always observed him to be a dependable, professional, compassionate person and a dedicated leader to his officers. And thirdly, another comment from another peer. We worked together on the COVID command group, making decisions for the town's response to the virus. I am confident that Deputy Chief Jones will be a powerful asset to our town as our police chief. As I think about what's ahead, and like my colleagues, personnel decisions are one of the most important roles of the Board of Selectmen, whether it is appointing a position such as a police commissioner or the many town volunteers we appoint. We have important work ahead of us within the town. Within the police department, we need to ensure that our men and women in uniform have the necessary training and tools and facilities to safely and effectively do their jobs. Like a lot of municipalities, we need to examine our practices and policies to ensure they conform with the role of the police department and our expectation of community policing. And we need continued strong leadership as both our community and the rest of the nation emerges from the public health crisis that we're currently facing. In my capacity as a town volunteer, I've had the opportunity to interact with David Jones in different capacities, whether it's budget development, personnel, administration, or community engagement. As I think about the important work that's ahead of us, I believe that he is the right person to lead the Hingham Police Department. And so I would join my colleagues in enthusiastically supporting this appointment. So with that, Joe and Bill, I would accept a motion.
I would make a motion to appoint David P. Jones as police chief, effective immediately.
Second.
Third. All those in favor, Joe Fisher,
Aye.
Bill Ramsey,
Aye.
Mary Power, aye. Chief Jones, congratulations. We look forward to
Thank you.
your leadership, and at this point, I would just like to invite you, if you'd like to make any remarks.
Great, yes, thank you very much. Thank you all for the very kind words. I'm really humbled by the confidence and trust that the board has shown in appointing me. I'm honored to be selected for this position. This is one that I've aspired towards since I was first hired. I'm fortunate to be able to serve such a vibrant community alongside such a dedicated professional team of officers and staff. I look forward to continuing to having meaningful conversations with all of our community members and working to ensure that citizens from all walks of life feel safe in our town. The Hingham Police Department has a long history of community engagement, and I'm excited to be able to once again offer our numerous outreach initiatives as the pandemic subsides. Lastly, I want to thank the men and women of the Hingham Police Department for their continued dedication and commitment. I will work tirelessly to provide them with the training and tools necessary to progress and innovate in our constantly evolving field. Thank you all again for this incredible opportunity.
Thank you very much, Chief. Our next agenda item, we're going to put you to work right away, Chief. The next item of business on our agenda is a fiscal year 21 capital repurposing request for hybrid police vehicles. Chief, if you would like to give us an overview of this request at this time, we'd appreciate it.
Great, thank you. So it's actually a two-part request. The first is requesting repurposing of $13,131 in existing capital in order to bridge a deficit in the cost of replacing 7 marked cruisers that are in this year's budget. The cost of the cruisers increased from $4,000 per vehicle when we originally put in the request, and equipment that we had anticipated as being transferable is unable to be reused or transferred and must be replaced due to Ford redesigning the interior and the exterior of the current model year. Secondly, for the hybrid portion, I'm requesting to repurpose an additional to $24,500 in existing capital to upgrade our purchase of these 7 cruisers with Ford's hybrid police vehicle option. I have spoken with area chiefs that have the vehicle in their fleet and the state police, who have on order and in their existing fleet 290 of these hybrid cruisers. All of them report favorably on their performance and maintenance. The potential annual fuel savings could more than pay for the requested funding, and the environmental benefits that this transition will bring are immeasurable. I'd ask you consider the request to repurpose $24,000 for the hybrid vehicles from a capital line item that was originally slated to replace our automated defibrillators, which have a longer life expectancy than we had originally planned, and we won't need the replacement this year. And then the remaining 500 capital that was slated for upgrading our evidence storage room, and I'd request that the $13,131 shortfall also come from that capital line item.
Thank you. And just for the benefit of the public, under Massachusetts general law, municipalities are unable to move funds from, one budget to another, from personnel to expenses or to repurpose capital without some sort of an approval. So that's what's taking place here. The exception to that under Massachusetts general law is school departments, but municipal departments have this requirement. Bill, do you have any questions for the chief about this repurposing request?
Yeah, a couple questions, Mary. Thank you. So repurposing, we're just moving the money around, right? We're moving it from one use to the vehicles. Is that right, Chief?
That's correct, yes.
And my understanding was the original purpose of the additional funds was for defibrillators that we thought we needed to needed to buy new ones, but that's not the case. The ones we have are working in good order in the last couple of years, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So, we found when we've had them for, this is the 5th year coming up now. So we'd originally said them for a 5-year replacement. And after speaking with the manufacturer and our medical officer, we discovered that they can actually last 10 years with proper maintenance and replacement of the batteries, which we've done. So we expect another 5 years approximately out of life expectancy out of them now.
And I'm thrilled that we're making a move here to be more environmentally conscious. I think that's something we're hearing a lot from our community about. I think that's a great move. And Chief, you're confident that the new vehicles are going to be able to help you and your officers accomplish their needs and their mission, correct?
Yeah, definitely, and I agree 100%. I think it is important that we start looking at different alternatives. And the hybrid vehicle that Ford has designed is purpose-built for police work. And it actually outperforms, in the tests that they've done, the vehicle that, the cruisers that we currently have. So we're actually getting sort of an upgrade in the vehicle as well.
Great, thank you, Chief.
You're welcome.
Joe?
Yes, Chief, what is the timing for this? When do we expect this to happen?
So I confirmed that the supplier that we use for our cruisers does have them. They're holding 7 vehicles for us pending approval of the board and the advisory committee. So potentially we could start seeing that transition within the next month to 2 months.
I understand that the performance standards are good. Is there any difference in performance in inclement weather, such as snow and ice, that we are experiencing these days?
No, so they're actually the same all-wheel drive that the current cruisers have. So there'll be no change in the performance there.
Great. And last question, I'm not sure if this is for you or for Tom. Is there a separate contract that needs to be signed in connection with this action?
Dave, did you want to take it? We're buying them off of state contract, I believe, right, Dave?
Yeah, that's correct. It's a state contract price that the dealer uses. So it will be bought off state contract.
Okay, great. Thank you. No other questions.
Okay. I don't have any questions questions at this time. Is there anyone in the public who has a question with respect to this agenda item, which is the repurposing of FY21 capital? Seeing none, I'd accept a motion.
Mary, there are two motions. I'll make the first one.
Okay.
I move to approve the request of the police department to repurpose $13,131 from the existing fiscal year 21 evidence room upgrade capital funds to bridge a deficit in the cost of replacing 7 marked police cruisers.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, Joe?
Aye.
Bill?
Aye.
Mary? Aye. Bill, could you make the second motion, please?
I make a motion to approve the request of the police department to repurpose $24,500 from the existing FY21 automated defibrillators capital funds to upgrade the purchase of 7 police cruisers with Ford's hybrid police vehicle option.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, Joe?
Aye.
Bill?
Aye.
Mary? Aye. Chief, thank you very much. The next
Great.
item
Thank
of
you all very
business.
much.
Thank you. The next item of business on our agenda is the discussion of 2021 annual town meeting warrant articles. This evening, the board will be discussing 3 articles. An article to amend the general bylaws to incorporate gender-neutral terms, a discussion of Route 3A corridor additional funds, and a discussion of the reconstruction of the town pier. So we are going to begin with Article Q. Article Q is a citizen petition to amend the general bylaws to adopt gender-neutral terms. This is actually, this petition is an initiative being brought forward by the Hingham League of Women Voters. Full disclosure, I am a member of the League of Women Voters, although I was not involved in the development of this work. But what I would say is that I think the League of Women Voters has a long history, both within and outside Hingham, of when the League takes on an issue and advances a warrant article, it is research, it is fact-based. People may recall that several years ago, the League of Women Voters sponsored a warrant article to reduce the limits on speaking time at town meeting. And on behalf of the board and the town, we are very grateful to the League for undertaking this important body of work and bringing this forward for consideration by the town. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Liza O'Reilly, member of the League of Women Voters and League member who has been spearheading this effort. Liza, I believe you have a presentation, and I believe that you have co-hosting ability, so you should be able to share your screen. So welcome, and thank you for being here this evening.
Thank you, and I am going to share my screen. If I get this right. Here we go. Okay, so thank you all, and I'm going to get right into this. So this is a League of Women Voters of Hingham effort, and we've submitted this as a citizen's petition, and all the citizens who signed it are League members. And the League formed a committee to look into this issue. I will compliment some of my committee members, Kate Boland, Kathy Schätzlein, Ellen Stone, and Nancy Perry, who put in several hours into this research. And when we were pursuing this topic, we researched many other towns that had gone through this effort. We also went through all of our general bylaws and redlined them with the changes that were being proposed. And then after doing the research on the towns and the redlining, we came together with all that, and then worked with town council to develop the warrant article and finalized what was presented. And as communications. We have on our website, and there's a link on the town website about how to submit a warrant article for town meeting. So we are following through on trying to answer the questions outlined in that document as well, so that the community understands this. So we're pursuing this because we feel it's the best interest of Hingham to support equity for all our citizens, elected officials, and staff. And we began this effort by looking first at the gender neutral terms and the titles of our boards and the positions that the boards hold. So first and foremost, considering the change of our naming our board of selectmen to a select board. And I will mention that other towns have brought up the idea of a board of select women, and we decided we weren't going to pursue that one, but just select board. And then also using the term of chair or chairperson in place of a chairman. And then once we went through all of that, we recognized that, well, if we change the name to the select board, that has implications on our bylaws. And so we went through the bylaws, looking at that, and then also identified other gender-specific terms and pronouns that we felt should be changed. And then that also led to discussion of having this be much more comprehensive and encouraging the use of gender-neutral terms for all Hingham communications and documents. So let me take you through the change to the select board. Through our research, we've recognized that over 90 communities in Massachusetts use the term and the title select board. Many have switched in the past 3 years, but Western Massachusetts towns actually switched to this title decades ago. And over a year ago, January 2020, the Massachusetts Selectmen's Association voted to change its name to their nearly 100-year-old organization to the Massachusetts Select Board Association. Just example, 3 of the towns that changed their title last year: Cohasset, Situate, and Wellesley. And we found that Milton and Situate also, when their warrant article was presented, also changed with all the gender neutral terms. And we used those 2 warrant articles to help us in crafting our proposed warrant article. So just as reference, for Hingham's benchmark towns, there are 20 towns, 13 have already changed their title to select boards. 5 of them remain with the Board of Selectmen title, and 2 are considering it for this year. That's Hingham and Hull. And 2 are actually town councils. So here is the list. Braintree and Weymouth are the town councils, and Hingham, Hull, Marblehead, Norwell, and Rockland are the ones that remain with the title of Board of Selectmen. All the others have already made the change. Then, just for your reference with the general bylaw updates, these are the terms that we had identified to change to use a gender neutral term. The Board of Selectmen would change to Select Board 73 times. Selectmen would change to Select Board members 58 times. The pronouns his, her, its would change to their 45 times. Him, he, or her to them 9 times. He or she to they 10 times. He to the town clerk 3 times. We did note in Article 6, which is regarding the duties and responsibilities of the town clerk, that there are several sections that lead their sections with the pronoun he, and that really stood out to us, particularly for the long dedicated service of our current town clerk, who is a woman who's been there for 26 years, and the 3 candidates for that post are also women, and so that particularly stood out to us. And then chairman would change to chair 4 times. items included in this proposed article because we wanted to be thorough and comprehensive so we wouldn't have to come back again at future town meetings. Hingham has 2 special acts that were approved by the legislature, the town administrator and the library, and these are both covered in this warrant article, particularly for the select board change. We are also encouraging Hingham to use gender-neutral terminology for all its communications and documents, and just examples would be that firefighter term is used in place of firemen, police officer in place of policeman, which are terms that are being used now in our community that we understand. And then also, we included reference language that's actually in Mass General laws that states wherever words of one gender appear in the town of Hingham general bylaws, such words shall be construed to include the other gender. And this we identified with town council that if we missed something, it's covered by adding this statement to the bylaws. And also, as we worked with town council, we also have had preliminary review with the Attorney General's office to ensure that we were comprehensive in covering what needed to be covered. So what's the impact of some of these changes? The boards and committees will have to adopt these changes and review their own policies as well. The town administrator would communicate to town departments and staff, and the superintendent of schools would communicate to the school department. I am aware that the school committee has had a year-long review of its policies, and many of these terms would be covered already in that review. So many departments are already on their way of using these terms, and this will just emphasize it. The League of Women Voters, our committee, 5 of us all looked at the bylaws to redline them. So many eyes, several hours, and this should help reduce the town's legal costs of just having to review that as opposed to having lawyers on the dime to make those changes. The website will have to be updated, but we intend this as a cooperative effort for everyone, and we are not specifying a deadline or penalties to not getting this done at a specific time, because we are aware that everyone has a lot on their plate. We will bring forth the zoning bylaw update for next year. Unfortunately, we missed the December 10th deadline, but we have that ready to go for next year. And there are not as many changes to those bylaws as the general bylaws. And the benefit for the town of this, we feel that the League's contribution is an opportunity to ensure that Hingham remains current with other towns, and that our time and our talents are helping to facilitate Hingham's local government execution. We feel it's important that all citizens are represented and engaged in the Hingham community. And finally, we do recognize the efforts that many women who have and continue to contribute to the civic life in Hingham, and that we want them to be recognized with their titles as appropriate. So that's it. Thank you for your support, and if anyone has questions, I can take them. And this presentation will be on the League website, so people can look at the redlining of the bylaws that we did and the other information that we compiled.
Liza, thank you so much, and thank you to the League for, as I mentioned, bringing this forward. I would just also note that we really appreciate that the League came to the town well in advance of the January 20th deadline, which gave us the ability to allow council to engage with the League so that the warrant article that was put forward on January 20th was actionable by town meeting, and there weren't any conflicts that would make it difficult. While we always have a warrant article deadline of January 20th, we encourage citizens to contact the town well in advance, and we are happy to provide assistance with counsel in making sure that the question that a citizen or a group wants to put forward to the town and to town meeting for its consideration is in a form where it's actionable. So that is appreciated. Joe, I think I'll lead off with you. Questions for Liza or league members about Article Q?
I do, but I actually want to start out with a very short story. I joined the Board of Selectmen as the only male when there was Karen Johnson and Mary Power were the other two selectmen. And my first meeting, or it was even before the first meeting, I asked, are we calling people selectmen or select person or just a member of the board, a select board? And I was instructed in no uncertain terms, selectmen. The women said these were the selectmen, and so that was my operating instructions until this evening. So I'm glad that this discussion is opening up, and I fully support what is being proposed. The Warrant article that I have seen, it appears to be almost a search and replace instruction to go into the warrant, to go into the general bylaws, and when you see the word him or her, to replace it with they. I've not seen a red line version. I was on the League of Women Voters website and did not see a red line version there. So is what's being proposed a substitution of the general bylaw with a red line version, or is it the actual warrant article with these search and replace instructions?
So the warrant, and I went through this with town council. The warrant article is simply noting the pronouns. We've gone through the redlined version of the bylaws has not been posted on the website yet, so I'll let you know when it's up there. But so we did go through and we picked the appropriate pronoun to fit in with the wording that's there. So we're not saying that our redlined version of the bylaws is the one that should be used, but we just did a lot of work on it so people, one, would understand what it is, and then also to help, the town staff and the town council of getting a leg up on it and adding another set of eyes to do the final version.
Okay, if I can do my own screen share for a second, Mary, if that is okay with you.
Sure. Joe, you're a co-host, so you can do that.
I will do it. Let's see here. Let's see if this is going to work. So this is,
yes.
Okay, so this, if everyone can see it, so this is Article 4.
Mm-hmm.
And I went through just to see how the search and replace that was in the article that I saw would work.
Yeah.
And so for example, Section 1, clearly file with the selectmen would be the select board. Yeah. A written report of, now here it's his or their, and literally, if I followed what's in the warrant article, this would now read there or there. There's no instruction. So, but I know that's not your intent. So that's why I was wondering if there was more specific language that would make it clear that in these circumstances, we don't just replace this, we're actually deleting it. And then down here, his, her, or its, the search and replace instruction would have this read their, or its. And that clearly this whole thing should go. And then when you go down, still in Section 4, and you've got this at least in 20 sections where you've got it his/her. So right. Both references will go. And so I understand that's your intention. I just did not see that reflected in the wording of the warrant article that's before us.
That is the intention, and I would have to refer back to town council on this, because we did have we talked about the pronouns and how to word it in the warrant article to capture every possible combination. And it was his recommendation that we separate the individual pronouns, and then insert them accordingly. So
So I can assure you that the language that we have does not accomplish this, but I also understand that it's your intention. And so I think if we forward this to AdCom, we should do it with the instructions that it reflects the intent that you've identified.
okay.
The question or the point that you raised about the clerk, because there it's not appropriate to change he to they, but it's actually to change it to the clerk.
Right.
And I'd suggest to you that also is true for Article 17. And I'll just go up to there, which is page, let's see if I can find it. Here we go. So, so the animal control officer may apprehend or impound any dog which he, so the he should not be changed to they, it should be the animal control officer, just as same way that you treated the town clerk. So Article 17, Section 2 should have the same treatment as you did with the town clerk. And then the other issue that I did not see addressed in the Warrant article is that when we start using they instead of he or she, the verb that goes along with it may no longer make sense. So this is, what is this? This is Article 15, Section 5, concerning skin diving. It says tow, set float, and flag him. So it would be they. While he is, it should not be now while they is, it would be they are. So we need to be changing verbs that go along with the pronouns that are being changed. And again, I did not see that reflected in the language that's before us. So I think the intent is clearly there and I fully support it. I just want to make sure that the end result is actually a bylaw that that makes sense. And then with respect to, I'm going to actually stop sharing this and go back to, if I can find it. Here we go. This is the did I just share the same one? No, all right. So this is the actual Warrant article, and that's why I meant it was written as a search and replace. Literally, we would be replacing he, she with they, their, and them, even when it became redundant. So I just want to make sure that that's cleaned up. And again, the special treatment for the town clerk here, I think we should expand also for Article 17. And there is language here about all currently active town or Hingham communications and documents. And the examples that are given are such as policies, rules, and regulations. And I think that's exactly the right place that should be, which are communications and documents of a general nature, not documents or communications that are personal and individual. So for example, if the Board of Selectmen was to write a letter of commendation to our animal control officer, we would probably compliment her. We would actually use gender-specific pronouns, and those would be official town communications. I just want to make sure that they are not caught up in the language here. So again, the examples you give are exactly the right examples, but I want to make sure that the request to use general neutral terminology is limited to communications and documents of a general manner and not personal and individual communications. So
yes, that was the intent.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I will say the one item that stood out to me the most, and that is I am least familiar with, is using the pronoun they to refer to a singular person. When we substitute they for he or they for she, all of a sudden we're using they, which is, as I've always learned, a plural pronoun to apply in a singular situation. But I understand that that is, in fact, what other communities are using, and that is what the League of Women Voters are promoting. I am assuming, since you are on the school committee, that it is also something that would be acceptable by the English teachers at Hingham High School, that we won't be reprimanded for using the wrong pronoun in these circumstances. That's all my comments. Thank you.
Mary, do you mind if I jump in just for a sec?
You want me to start, get this off or not?
Yeah, Joe, I think if you stop sharing, sometimes it's helpful to, thank you, see everybody on the screen. Tom, please go ahead.
I just wanted to, Joe, thank you for that. You and I obviously had spoken about that a little bit ago, and I just wanted to let Liza know that we did talk to John, and John said that those changes, if adopted and worked into the recommended motion by the AdCom, if they were to do that, would be in keeping with your article, which is a key ruling from John. So I just wanted you to know that.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, and Liza, it's not unusual, for a recommended motion to be modified to address any, concerns about carrying out the intent of something. So I think, again, the good news here is that we have a bit of time to determine the best way to address that, and certainly we would, continue to engage counsel in that, so that we can get to quick resolution of some of the I think unintended consequences that Joe has identified. Bill, questions or comments with respect to Article Q?
Not a lot of questions. It's my thanks to Liza for the presentation, and my thanks to the League for putting this forward. Mary, I think you're exactly right. When the League proposes a warrant article, it's always very well researched, it's always very well done, and this is another example of that. I know a lot of communities have gone to this format, and I think it's just the right thing to do, and glad to support it. So thank you for all your work.
Thank you.
Great. And so I feel like I have to explain Karen Johnson and myself to to people on the call. I think Karen and I are both we're rule followers. So if town meeting says it's a board of selectmen,
Exactly.
until town meeting says anything else, we are rule followers. But I was reminded that when I first ran for office in 2015, I remember a very young child approaching me and saying, "Mrs. Power, why does your sign, if your sign says selectmen, but you're a woman, so if you, why is that?" And I didn't have a very good explanation in 2015, and I still don't think there's a very good explanation now. I think this is important work that, again, I'm just very grateful to the League for bringing it forward. It's overdue. I would also say that when I first heard the term select board, and I have monthly get-togethers with my female counterparts from other towns. Select board at first felt a little awkward to me. I've seen select person, I've seen different things. And actually over the last year, as neighboring communities have looked at this, and actually Norwell is looking at it right now, so select board seems to just sort of be more natural. So I'm really comfortable with this. Again, I think it's long overdue. And again, very grateful to the League. At this point, I would open it up if there is anyone in the public who has a question or wishes to make a comment about Article Q. And when recognized, if you could please give your name and address for the record. If you could please direct questions and comments to the chair. I will probably turn it right over to Liza or maybe to Tom, but that process works. That's kind of our protocol, so we'd appreciate that. Ray Estes.
Hi, Mary. Ray Estes, 92 Fort Hill Street. Thank you. Just a question. One, I think the work is great. I applaud the league for putting this time in. This is obviously a big project, and it's nice to see that we're catching up with a lot of our surrounding neighboring towns. I just had a kind of a process question. I went through the bylaws, and I don't think at any point it says the town shall be governed by a board of selectmen or something like that, right? It refers to the selectmen. So I'm just curious, is there any other source that we need to do anything about to change the title of our governing body? Has any other town had to do anything? Like the selectmen, I think it's derived from Mass General laws, right? So just the term of art, if you will, Board of Selectmen, or the name selectmen. Is there anything outside of Hingham's bylaw? Because it seems to me if we change the bylaw, we're changing the references, right? And just how we refer to the names, but not the actual official title or position, if you will. So I'm just curious if there's anything outside of Hingham that needs to be done in order to officially change the Board of Selectmen to Select Board.
I don't know if this is a question for Liza or for Tom Mayo.
I can share that of our research and my discussion with town council is that's why the two special acts are included in here, because town council was concerned that those be captured as well. And then other towns, we may have to go to the legislature and through the steps, but no other town has had a problem of getting approval through that. But the two special acts were the two things that we noted for Hingham that might be other than the general bylaws.
Tom, did you have anything to add?
Sure. Yep. No, Liza's absolutely right about those two. I would also just add, though, in speaking with Attorney Coughlin today, Ray, that he suggested that we would be able to turn if this law is approved by town meeting, the town, as it has been with this language in other communities, that the Attorney General has approved it as is. So she will have taken on those other questions.
And I would just add, Ray's brought up a good question, which is, where might it change in other places? And, one example that comes to my mind are election ballots, because election ballots list titles. And my understanding of the bylaws of the town are these are the rules. And that once the bylaws are changed, any sort of documents or anything that's not in conformance with the bylaws needs to be adjusted. So I would sort of say that some of those things might happen downstream after this is approved by town meeting. And again, the Attorney General has to approve all of our, all of the business in the warrant. But there may be some additional downstream type things like a ballot that will need to change. And again, the triggering event will be the change in the bylaw. Thank you, Ray. Anyone else question or comment on Article Q? Michelle Larned.
Yes, Michelle Larned, 15 Volusia Road. I just wanted to make two comments about things that Joe mentioned. So the first is, so they is actually used consistently throughout our language as a singular pronoun. So for instance, if you were to say, a person left a sweater in a movie theater, but you don't know who they were, you might say they left their sweater. And so it's frequently used, so I don't think that the English teachers at the high school will come after us for that. The second is with respect to the specific communication. So if you were giving somebody an award, I would ask that we would ask the person's pronouns rather than assuming them in that type of language moving forward. And that's all.
Certainly. Thank you very much. Anyone else? Okay, seeing none, so this will come up for the board for a vote. And typically the way that we vote warrant articles, the motion that we have is to vote favorable action, which essentially says that the board supports the intent of the warrant article. And so to the extent that the advisory committee makes any modifications to the recommended motion that don't substantially change the scope, the board's approval of Article Q still stands. To the extent that anything changes in a material way, it would come back to the board. But the things that we've talked about this evening, according to council, would not rise to that level. So Bill or Joe, I would accept a motion on Article Q.
I'd make a motion to recommend favorable action of Article Q.
Sorry, I was muted. Bill, if I could, because I spoke to town council about this, if I could substitute a motion for what you've just said, which is to recommend favorable action of Article Q with a request to the advisor committee to assure that the language to be used in the general bylaws is grammatically correct and consistent with the intent of the League of Women Voters, with the final version of adjustments to the general bylaws to be reviewed by the Board of Selectmen.
So hearing that, I would withdraw my motion and second Joe's motion.
Joe, just for clarity, are you suggesting that this needs to then come back to us?
No.
Okay.
But after assuming that it's adopted at town meeting, then a final version of the general bylaws is going to be produced, and I'm suggesting that that version needs to be reviewed by us.
Thanks for the clarity. Okay. Any further discussion? All those in favor, Joe?
Aye.
Bill?
Aye.
Mary? Aye. Liza, members of the league, thank you so much.
Thank you. Good rest of the meeting.
Thank you. The next article for consideration is Article X. Article X is Route 3A Corridor Additional Funds. We are joined this evening by members of the Route 3A Task Force, and I'm going to introduce the chair of that task force, Judy Sneath. Judy, you are a co-host of the meeting. I understand you also have some materials to share with the board, so welcome, and you can begin, and you should be able to share your screen.
Hi, everyone, and thank you. I am going to try to share my screen. Let me see, I might have to, yeah. What screen do you see in front of you? No,
it's
not the one we want to see.
Yeah.
It's not, it's the one that I want to see, right?
Well, you know.
Okay, wait, no, now I'm seeing, okay, now I think I've got it right. Do you see just a slide now?
That's the one.
Great.
We
Thank
see
you for
your social security number, all your PINs, bank account numbers.
Good luck with that, but yeah, I really don't like to see it. Okay, so my name is Judy Sneath. I am the chair of the Route 3A Task Force. I'm also a member of Hingham's Planning Board. I'm here tonight with Alan Peralt from the 3A Task Force, and he is also on the trustees of the Bathing Beach, and with our town engineer, J.R. Fry. Tonight, I'll just give you an overview of this project because it has been in the working for a long time, and most of you are probably pretty familiar with it. Once I give you that background, we'll get into the detail of the town meeting warrant article requesting additional design funds, and I hope JR and Alan will help me answer your questions. So this is a picture of Hingham Harbor. As you can see, the roadway improvement project begins up towards the west where Otis Street turns off into Crow Point, travels east through the downtown area and over through the roundabout, up the rotary, up Summer Street to the intersection of Rockland. Well, this is George Washington Boulevard where it ends. The safety improvement project addresses a number of issues and concerns that have been raised through various reports, primarily the high crash rate and congestion at the Rotary, North Street, and also along Summer Street, substandard intersection geometrics, excessive speed through the area, limited pedestrian connections to Hingham Harbor, insufficient and substandard sidewalks, lack of bicycle accommodations, and insufficient roadway shoulders. So I'm just going to give you, we're not going to go into the whole project. I just wanted to give you some of the highlights from the project after reviewing kind of where we are. How did we get to this very large project in Hingham? Well, back in 2009, the Board of Selectmen were talking about alternative designs for the Rotary because there were a lot of accidents there. And by 2013, the neighborhood concerns were being heard at the state level, and Mass DOT conducted a roadway safety audit along that Summer Street to North Street area. A lot of the data for this project came from that roadway safety audit. In 2014, the state asked the town asked the state to conduct a corridor study, which was completed in 2016. And in 2015, I guess it was, town meeting voted design funds for this project. So $400,000 from town meeting in 2015 led to the project being initiated by DCI as our design engineer. So you can see most of these slides that I'm showing you have been produced by DCI. The project started then in February 2016. In 2018, we conducted the road diet pilot program, which you are familiar with, considering the elimination of one lane in each direction between the Rotary and Martin's Lane. And by 2019, we submitted a 25% design to the state. In 2019, also, the Hingham's town engineer was replaced on this project by Van Ness and Associates as a contract engineer. And last year, J.R. Fry joined us as a town engineer on the project also. I just mention that because the design has really benefited from detailed review from many corners, and a lot of talented minds have gone into designing this project. We're continuing to hold public meetings to review all of the detail. Most recently in December, we held a community forum that was attended by over 50 residents. And the good news is the project is on the 2025 TIP. If you're not familiar with the vocabulary, the TIP is the Transportation Improvement Program. It's the state's 5-year rolling capital plan. In our case, for the 97 cities and towns in the Boston Regional Metropolitan Planning Organization, the MPO's area. And the TIP basically documents all of the projects receiving federal funds in the region on a 5-year basis. So we are on the TIP for 2025. The way the project has been progressing, we would be ready to break ground in 2024. But right now, don't see that happening, but we are ready, and oftentimes the state does move things around on the tip. So basically, the biggest feature of this project from end to end is that it is a safety improvement project. There will be sidewalk shoulders on the roadway and a 10-foot shared use path basically from end to end. So the safety for cars, for pedestrians and cyclists will improve. This somewhat blurry slide just gives you one example of, this is actually at the harbor where you can see to the left, well, to the tree on this side, that's the riprap leading down to the harbor. You can see a grassy area, people sitting there, followed by the harbor walk, the trees, and then over where this woman is standing, you can see that this 10-foot shared use path that would be going in, a 5-foot buffer, and then the proposed roadway, and then another sidewalk on the other side of the street. So throughout the project, there is great work complying with the state's Complete Streets design criteria, and you will see protective buffers between the traffic and the shared use path or the sidewalk, depending on which section of the project we're in. Additionally, bicyclists are accommodated on that 10-foot path, but if you have athletic cyclists, there are ample shoulders on the roadway now for cyclists to also go through quickly on the road. This is just one example of the landscaping plan that's being developed. You can see the project ties into the work of the Harbor Development Committee, which you can see here. This is the beginning. This is Otis Street and the beginning of that harbor walk that exists today. The landscape design calls for kind of a meeting area there. The Presley Associates took great care to preserve views, preserve trees, and increase the overall enjoyment of the harbor. The North Street intersection is really, to me, the centerpiece of this, although other people would have different perspectives, but for a very, very long time, there has been a lack of connection for pedestrians between the downtown and the harbor. It feels unsafe to cross there today. As a result of this project, the roadway itself will shift south somewhat, allowing for a 10-foot wide landing area on the water side of that intersection so that people with strollers, on bikes, pedestrians, groups can get through and land safely on the other side before deciding which way to go. You can also see up here near the word North Street, along this roadway, we had a shared use path that started up by Otis Street that was coming along here. And where the red line starts, you can see the shared use path will cross the parking area and go over to the Iron Horse Park. And people, cyclists, can make their way across the bridge over to Whitney Wharf, to the park, to the Veterans Memorial, and then connect again to the shared use path on this side. This splitting of the shared use path from the sidewalk was necessary because it's a tight intersection. And we were also able to accommodate a third lane for traffic traveling from the east to the west along here, so that in this dedicated turn lane, cars can wait to turn onto Water Street, cars can wait to turn onto North Street, allowing 2 full lanes of traffic to continue moving through. So the project design, I think, is pretty remarkable in this area because it really accounts for vehicular, pedestrian, and cyclists, safety, convenience, while not interrupting, really reducing any parking for the private businesses in this area. So that was also very important to us, not to disrupt any of the businesses' parkings. So that's just an example of the detail in that one. And finally, just for a little more detail, this is the newly designed rotary. It's now a roundabout because we gain a significant amount of land that you can see at the top of the screen along the water. That shared use path that was continuing through North Street is now continuing along the water. It's a 10-foot wide multi-use path. And the landscape architects are also able to get bike racks in there, some benches, so it will really improve the enjoyment, the visibility of the harbor through here. At the same time, the geometry of the roundabout serves to reduce the speed of traffic going through there. It still maintains 2 lanes of traffic, but it is much more clearly marked which way the cars are supposed to go. And there will also be pedestrian crosswalks at each of the intersections through here. As you know, to the east of this portion of the project, all up to Martin's Lane, because of that road diet, there will be only one lane of traffic in each direction, again, reducing the speed of traffic, but most importantly, I think, is the safety of traffic. That is the section of this roadway that experienced the above average high injury rate accidents. And now that S-curve will, the traffic will be calmed, pedestrians and cyclists will be able to move through there safely. So finally, what are we here for tonight? This project, as I said, began with a 2015 town meeting approval for phase 1 design expense of $400,000. At that time, we contracted with DCI, and the estimated construction cost of the project was $7.5 million. That would put the anticipated design fee at 6.5% of the project. As the project design progressed, we, the town engineer, the task force, and the state determined that the project needed to be more extensive than was originally imagined for a couple of reasons. One, to comply with the complete streets and to accommodate the shared use path and all of those sidewalks and buffers. The second is a little piece of Otis Street down by the culvert was added, and other design elements. So it's a more significant project today. In 2017, after we conducted the pilot road diet program, we incurred another $24,000 in design expenses on top of the $400,000. And so in 2019, we went back to town meeting for approval of additional phase 1 and phase 2 expenses of $195,000. So our expenses to date are $619,197. Today we are here to request your agreement with a warrant article requesting $200,000 for the remaining design engineering through construction. So the Mass DOT has revised the construction cost to $15.3 million to reflect that change in scope and complexity. The final design fee would be $819,000, which is 5.4% of the estimated construction cost. The project is scheduled to break ground, as I said, in 2025. The lead to getting here traces back to 2009, talking about the Rotary, to the residents' involvement in getting the state to recognize that there were safety concerns along the area. And this is a remarkable state investment of mostly federal transportation dollars in the town of Hingham, and at a very reasonable cost to us for the design expenses. So that is the warrant article in a nutshell.
Judy, thank you. I just have a couple quick questions. First of all, Judy, if you just could please, for the record, if you could just state your address.
Oh, I'm sorry, 89 North Street.
Thank you very much. Judy, two questions that I have before opening up to my colleagues. With respect to the $15.3 million construction cost, will that money, will the town have any responsibility for any of those costs, or will that entirely be funded by the state?
That is entirely funded by the state.
So we're basically putting up $800,000 to get a $15 million improvement that would address many of the issues that you've just identified.
It addresses all those issues and more. It's really kind of it's a remarkable investment. I don't know of any.
Judy, what would the consequence be if town meeting didn't authorize this? What happens?
Well, the the project is not fully designed, and in order to attract those funds, a town has to commit to the full design of the project. That's how you attract these dollars, is to have a fully designed project.
And,
So
and
we
either
would lose this.
for either you or JR, if you get out of the tip line, how easy or difficult is it to get back in?
Well, the issue is that we're now talking a project of sufficient magnitude that rather than being able to kind of slip something in, which you can do with a $1 million, $2 million, even a $5 million project, a $15 million project, once it's on the tip, it's hard to just slip that in into their budgeting scheme, because they've got their big bones projects, 100, 150 million, and then they drop down into a middle range of smaller scope projects. And those are where a lot of these kinds of projects fall into, and they're pretty competitive.
Yep. So kind of the bottom line here is that if town meeting doesn't authorize this, we could potentially lose 12 years worth of work and get out of the queue for addressing, these issues that in some shape or form the town has been going after. I just want to provide that perspective because projects like this don't come, these are a little less, we've worked hard to get into the tip. A lot of people aren't familiar with it. And I just think it's important that we all understand collectively, not just the problem we're trying to solve, but how we're trying to bring state dollars into the town to address it, and the consequences were the town to defer this project in any way. I think those are important considerations that the voters need to take into account.
Thank you, Mary, for saying that, because I will also add that as time goes on, if the state changes any design features in their criteria, then the town has to incur the cost of redesigning the project to meet those new design criteria. And that has happened with the Rotary design. We had to make some changes since the beginning of our proposed project because of some changes that they made to their criteria.
Thank you. Joe, questions or comments relative to Article X?
Oh, Judy, thank you. That was an incredible presentation.
Thank you.
Your group really has just done incredible, remarkable work. So how do we make this all happen tomorrow? It's so needed at the town, and it will be such a benefit. I'd like to walk out my door and see it immediately. It's just incredible. I do have a question about how this relates to the efforts of harbor development in light of climate change. They've been looking at resiliency issues, and to what extent do those issues impact what's being planned for the Route 3A corridor improvements?
I would let JR or Alan add to this, but right now this project is a roadway improvement project that conforms with Mass DOT's criteria, and is not really a resilience project. So what they're doing, I think, it will tie into this, and we're coordinating our two projects. They are two very different projects.
No, that's a great answer. And I think in answer to Mary's question, what happens if the 200,000 is not appropriated? I thought your committee was responsible for coming up with that money individually if the town doesn't do it. Is that right, Judy?
Sure. You saw my bank account number.
That's right. So no, really, I mean, this is really the design, the features that you've shown us. I really can't wait for it to happen. So thank you. Nothing else.
Bill, questions or comments relative to Article X?
Judy, thank you for your presentation and for all the work you've
invested in this project. And Alan, thank you as well, and JR. You know, when I first saw this on the agenda, I was seeing that stuff, oh, we're gonna contribute, $200,000 more. But, Mary, you put it perfectly in perspective. And the town's gonna get a $15 million benefit for this. And it's gonna be a phenomenal project when it's done. We need a more walkable harbor. We need to connect North Street better to the harbor. And we need a safer road down there. So I'm really looking forward to 2024 when this becomes a reality.
Thank you.
Is there anyone, Alan Peralt, before I open up to the public, member of the task force?
Yes, Mary. I think one of the things.
Alan, can you give your address, please, for the record?
Yes, 39 Elm Street in Hingham. I think most of the board members know who the members are of our committee, but it's Paul Healy, who at the time was one of the selectmen. It's Deirdre Anderson, who was really the champion of getting this off ground for the Summer Street people. It's Judy with her planning board experience, me with harbor development and Bathing Beach trustees experience, and Bryce Blair, who's the neighborhood of Crow Point. So I think in some ways, when you look at how this project has evolved, and it kind of goes to what Joe was saying, we had people with real certain perspectives wanting to make sure not only was this going to be a transportation project, but we were going to get other benefits out of it. So that Bryce is coming with, how do we get in from Crow Point? Originally, it was supposed to stop at the Bathing Beach. And in the first year, it expanded to go up essentially to the Lobster Pound. That's a big change. And so that happened. They weren't going to replace the light at the Bathing Beach. The North Street intersection wasn't going to get this level of improvement. So I think because of the committee we have, 3 or 4 of the members all live within probably, 3/10 of a mile of the harbor. So we brought that perspective to it. And I think in some ways, the state's been pretty good going along with us, semi-expanding the scope. This business of going the shared use path and doing that, it kind of gets to what Joe was saying. It really ties in the whole waterfront, while it is in the state's mind a transportation project. So I think that's just worth reinforcing. When we get to town meeting, I think that has to be understood.
Thank you very much, Alan. Is there anyone in the public who has a question or wishes to make a comment with respect to Article X? Seeing none, Bill and Joe, I would be ready to take action on this article if one of you would like to offer a motion.
Sure. I'll move to recommend favorable action of Article X.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, Joe?
Aye.
Bill?
Aye.
Mary, aye. Judy, JR, Alan, thank you so much for an excellent presentation. Please pass along our appreciation to other past and present members of the task force. I think to Alan's point, the contributions of so many have produced a project that is really addressing a number of opportunities and issues in the town, and has really well positioned the town to bring a lot of our state tax dollars here into Hingham. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
The next article that the board is taking up, and my expectation this evening is that we are going to have a discussion about Article Z, but the board will probably not be taking action on Article Z tonight. Article Z is Reconstruction of the Town Pier. We're joined this evening by members of the Harbor Development Committee, including Chair Bill Reardon. Bill, we have made you a host. The board did receive a copy of your presentation earlier this afternoon, and thank you for sending that. We look forward to you walking the board and the public through the materials, and I'd invite you to give your name and address for the record, and then you can share your screen and walk us through.
So thank you, Mary. The 2 other members of the committee who are with me are Michael Bohr, the Vice Chair of Harbor Development Committee, and Peter Brannigan, who is a civil engineer who is a new addition to the committee. Welcome, because he brings his own personal experience. My name is Bill Reardon. I'm the chairman of the Harbor Development Committee. My address is 9 Steamboat Lane, on the harbor. So I know this area well. Can you see the screen in front of you?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So what my purpose this evening is, as Mary has said, this too is a project with a long history and a long tail. And the intent that tonight, really for the first time in almost a full year, is to be back in front of the Selectmen to bring the Selectmen up to speed with where we have been since March 9th last year when we last met with the Selectmen on this topic. And we withdrew the article that would have proceeded with Article Z a year ago. So just to orient everyone, and Bill Ramsey, I'm particularly mindful that you were not even on the board through much of the history of this. Joe Fisher is the liaison to the harbor and has been meeting with the Harbor Development Committee periodically through the last year, so he's reasonably up to speed. And Mary has extended history from having heard parts of this presentation before. So, but for you, Bill, this is all new, so we're very mindful of that. So just to orient both the Selectmen and as well as members of the public, the town owns three wharf areas on the harbor. The first, where you can see my pointer, is what we refer to as Iron Horse Park or Town Pier. This is where Ken Corson has his shack. The next parcel is privately owned. Whitney Wharf is ours as well. This parcel here, which is referred to as the Veterans Park and former mobile station parcel, is another town-owned parcel. This wharf is privately owned. And finally, the third wharf that we own that we're looking at is Barnes Wharf, which is currently the home for the Hingham Maritime Center under a lease that the town has with Hingham Maritime. They have plans to move forward with development of that wharf. So to orient here a little bit, I just want to go through the chronology a bit. This, as Judy Sneath mentioned, this Article 2 has had a long history. Really starts back in 2015 when I was fairly new to the committee. I've been chair since 2013. Alan preceded me. We developed an action plan knowing that the harbor front and those three town-owned wharves were deteriorating badly and needed attention. So the issue was to address their condition and look ahead to climate change. Early years data gathering, looking at the structure of the wharves. We had Beals and Thomas as our engineering firm. Look at survey information, take borings, all of the things necessary to kind of assess where do we need to go with these wharves. In 2017, we selected three. The three that we own. We consciously set aside Steamboat Wharf, the last wharf, because it is so far deteriorated and frankly is not much of an issue from a flooding perspective. Selected those three, working with Beals and Thomas and with the benefit of the Kleinfelder study, which had been performed in 2015, set a initial target date for an interim assessment of where did we want to go as 2013. We also, after extended meetings, selected a proposed height for the existing wharves, and I'll give some color to that in a little bit. The term I will use is 11 feet NAVD. There is an element of modularity over and above that for Town Pier, which is the sole article that we're considering for this evening. Excuse me, I'm going to go back one, just to finish this chronology here. So in 2018, we voted after, again, extended public meetings to look at the wall design. Chose that we would proceed with stone, granite, the look at Town Pier and at Barnes Wharf, and a riprap armor stone approach at Veterans Park. We continue to develop resiliency designs and develop the permitting calendar that we would need to go through in a difficult period in 2018 and 2019 when the engineering department was a bit up in the air. We gave a presentation to the selectmen at the end of 19, and as I said, we're prepared to go forward in 2020. But in the end, elected because of new changes in the cost estimate and some questions because we did not have an on-board town engineer at that time. So we withdrew the article and stepped back. So that's a bit of the history very quickly. What I want to do now is just give you a sense of what this is all about. This is Town Pier during the worst of the March 2018 nor'easter. As you can see, it's underwater by about 2 to 3 feet. I would note that if you were standing right here, right on the wharf, and looked over to Whitney Wharf, you would have seen that Whitney Wharf was not underwater. Actually, there was another foot or a foot and a half of freeboard at Whitney Wharf. So that's simply a function of Town Pier is so much lower. It's almost 4 feet lower than Whitney Wharf. Here's a different view, just showing a little lower tidal effects, but you again have the sense of the storm itself. This next slide gives you a sense of kind of the aftermath. The Iron Horse was an island because there was water, that surrounded the whole area. In looking at this, one of the documents that we used fairly extensively was the Kleinfelder 2015 study, which the town paid for in order to get a sense of our vulnerability, particularly for major town assets like downtown, like the pumping station in Station Street and Route 3A. This is a bit of a sense of the type of work that Kleinfelder presented to us. It shows for both a 100-year storm and a 500-year storm in 2030, what kind of inundation in feet we might possibly expect if we had flooding and tide levels expected in that time frame. Similarly, they did a bit of a model simply to say, look, at 2030 with a 100-year storm, likelihood of that they ascribed as roughly 1%. This is what stars and downtown would look like. They also, their other time frame is 2070, and they went so far. It's very hard to project out that far, but if you look at 2070, here's that same view. Now, obviously, this is a simulation, and is dependent on whether those flood elevations actually occur. What I explained is that I wanted to give you a sense of a key part of our determination to select the elevation of 11 feet. This is a review showing all of the heights of the various structures on the harbor itself. This reflects some major changes where the Armorstone wall at the bathing beach, which we inserted back in 2014, Alan can correct me if I'm wrong. Similarly, the bathing beach parking lot, we put in Armorstone and a dune. That gets you up to a height of about 11 feet. The Armorstone is at 12 and a half. Here's Whitney Wharf, which, as I mentioned, is roughly 4 feet higher than Town Pier. Town Pier current elevation is 7.2 in AVD. Whitney Wharf is 11 feet. Similarly, Veterans Park is about 7 feet. The mobile station the same, and Barnes Wharf about the same. So part of our recommendation was in moving to a proposed 11 feet elevation was to make uniform the height that the most of the town-owned assets would be at the harbor going forward. We would be uniform and at a significant benefit in comparison to where we are today. This is just to give you a sense of some of the other challenges. These are the Fema flood maps, and they show that oddly there are 2 different velocity zones that impact Town Pier itself. Here, this is Town Pier displayed right here. And on the west side of Town Pier, the velocity zone, according to FEMA, is 12 feet. And on the right side, it's more like 14 feet. So it presents some challenges. It is true that with the northeast storms, like the storm of 2018, you do get more wave action, coming in on Town Pier itself. This is a similar but closer in shot that again shows the bifurcation of Town Pier between the two different zones. So, and this is just to give you a sense of, let me come back to this, excuse me, at the, my finger is moving on my mouse, my apologies. This is just a section of Town Pier east and west to give you a sense of current FEMA heights, and Otis Street, which is Route 3A. Judy just went at length to emphasize that the state is looking on the 3A project as a transportation project. They are not contemplating any significant raise to the elevation of Route 3A. So there is an element of 3A as a dike, and there's only so much protection that something we might do at Town Pier can do if we in fact have elevations greater than we're currently experiencing. What I also wanted to give particularly Bill Ramsey a sense of is the kind of thought process that we went through with our consultant and with our town engineer at the time, looking at the projections that Kleinfelder had put out to us, saying, well, what happens if you have a storm every 20 years or 50 years or 100 years? What's the current height of the wall at Town Pier? And we did this for each of the projects, but this happens to be Town Pier. And this showed that if you added 3 feet to a new height of 10.2 feet, we actually ended up going to 11, that you would be covering and be protected for the 100-year storm without waves. If you have significant wave action during a storm, yes, this new height at Town Pier would be overtopped, but that simply says that you must deal with the drainage issue after a storm, so that water can be released back into the harbor as the peak of the storm, roughly an hour to an hour and a half on either side, is dealt with. So the end result, which is before you, and this is not a slide that you're able to take in, I fully understand, we have this in a much larger version, but this is the developed design that came out of all of that work and caused us to review this at great length, both in the 2018-2019 timeframe and again in the summer of 2020. I'll just mention a couple of things that are critical here. We are talking about this section, which is currently a small beach, but not a safe beach. There is a play area there for children, but the harbor master is very concerned because boating activities, this is reflecting the new boat ramp that the state will build for us, we hope in the 2022 or 2023 timeframe. With boats going out here, we can't have bathers, especially young bathers, coming out from this beach. So this will be Armorstone. This section here will be a granite wall, increased to a height of 11 feet initially. When I mentioned modularity, that simply is saying that if we build a foundation to support 11 feet, it would also allow the addition of an additional 1.5 feet at a later time if tides continue to rise as is feared. Currently, as you know, there's parking all along here, actually right now on both sides, which is unfortunate. This plan would call for all of that parking to be moved to a new parking area. In this section, this would be a one-way street going through. This is Red Eye Roasters here. And as Judy has mentioned, the shared use path would come into this, and we are coordinating with the 3A task force to make sure that the shared use path works in this design. So this is the ultimate design that we would propose to move forward with. I mentioned that there was a pause a year ago. We had a new cost estimate. It was a significantly higher cost estimate. And there was, because we did not have our own town engineer, an external engineer who raised some questions about the effectiveness of the elevation at 11 feet with modularity at 12 and a half. So through the summer of last year, now with the aid of J.R. Fry joining us, the Harbor Development Committee reviewed and revisited all of the thinking that had gone into developing this proposal as reflected in this final design here, and basically went back and confirmed that the risk-based recommendation that we had developed was still appropriate and something that as a committee we felt was worthy of bringing forward to town meeting. We did come to a slightly altered realization that I've said many times, this was a project that started as a reconstruction and a repair job and became more and more conscious of the resiliency aspects and flooding aspects, but with a realization that even if we had higher walls on all of the 3 town-owned properties, there are still other gaps along the harbor that are either owned privately or will have to be addressed with the state at the Rotary. So we realized that the major emphasis for proceeding with this project for Town Pier specifically, which we have pulled out and prioritized, was first, safety. The current pier is deteriorating fairly rapidly. There is no lip at all, so that a bicycle could go off the end of the pier. Parents with children or animals, walking around what would be the harbor walk around this are currently there's no protection at all. It is also important to emphasize that it is this town pier which is the only publicly accessible access to the water that our citizens have. They can use the boat ramp, but the boat ramp is controlled by the state. And there are some limitations in terms of what people can do, and they still can't tie up their boat there, whereas Town Pier, obviously, they can do that. So that was important to us as a reason to move forward. There is also, we've talked about the Harbor Walk for many years. It's been built up thus far in 3 pieces, in the Grove at the bathing beach, across the bathing beach parking lot, and then in the section in front of the current bandstand. We intend to carry that on, carry it around here, and then continue as Judy's slide earlier showed, across Whitney Wharf Bridge and continuing. So it's those reasons, and not resiliency alone. We fully understand that there will be gaps. Our approach to all of the town wards has been an opportunistic one to prepare them, get them ready. We were urged years ago by our state senator and our state representative to get projects shovel ready so that when funding could be available, we would be prepared to do that and say, we're ready to go here. So I need to bring you more currently, however. In the fall, in November, our conservation agents, with the help of Selectman Liaison Fisher, came to us and said, the philosophy, if you will, and the direction of the Conservation Commission has been transitioning over the last several years with new leadership. And there may be some reservations concerning the direction that these projects are taking, which involve an increase in the vertical elevation of structures along the harbor. That's a reasonable concern, obviously, something that is within their jurisdiction. So we undertook to meet with the Conservation Commission, chose to consciously not actually file what would be the next logical step, which is a notice of intent to be filed by the town with its own Conservation Commission. Instead, we met initially with them in early December, basically went through this slide deck so that they would understand the history of the project, the logic behind it, the degree to which it's a reconstruction project, and the degree to which it's a resiliency project. We met again with them in January. Here, we consciously chose to provide them a draft of the notice of intent. It was not technically filed with them. So our meetings with them were not a hearing on that notice of intent, but really meant the two committees, Harbor Development and Concom, to talk through this important infrastructure issue for the town. At the end of that second meeting, it became clear that some of the principal concerns that the Conservation Commission had related to the impact that adding additional elevation to the town pier wall would create in terms of wave action in a major storm. One of the reasons why we chose to continue to make our recommendation was our working with J.R. Fry as town engineer, who pointed out that adding additional height takes energy away from wave action coming on the shore in a northeast storm, and that reduces the force of wave action. But the Concom was saying, yes, but there may be other effects of that wave action bouncing off that wall and going to abutters or going to other places in the harbor. So they indicated that was a concern for them. We collectively, JR principally, offered to the Conservation Commission that we would engage one of the firms that had been involved in the Kleinfelder study in 2015. This is an outfit called Woods Hole Group, not to be confused with the Woods Hole Institute, but many of their people actually go back and forth. They're the ones who did all the tidal studies and all the wave action studies that was part of the Kleinfelder report. So I'm going to, at this point, turn it over to JR for a little bit, for him to describe what it was that we asked Woods Hole Group to do and what they have provided as a proposal to be responsive both to the concerns that the Conservation Commission had, as well as concerns and looking forward that our committee is very interested in. So could I pass it over to JR at this point?
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you, Bill. That was a great summary. So continuing on, we reached out to Woods Hole Group and requested a proposal from them to address some of these concerns and get a comprehensive overview of the impacts that we would anticipate for all of these improvements, Town Pier, Barnes Wharf, Veterans Park, the impacts that we could anticipate based on the latest modeling. The latest modeling, which was actually just recently completed for the state, for MassDOT, in 2020. And that is based on the Massachusetts Coast flood risk model. So Woods Hole Group actually conducted that work for MassDOT. They were able to pass along the initial results of that GIS in GIS form to us. And we've begun to take a look at that, but I haven't gotten deep into the weeds in it yet in terms of how those projections relate to what we previously had from Kleinfelder. With that said, what Woods Hole Group would be doing for us is they would update the coastal flood risk maps and prepare flood pathways maps, which would identify exactly where the flooding would occur at various storms and various tidal conditions, projected out at 2030, 2050, and 2070. They would review the existing conditions modeling, and that they'd review that modeling because it would give us a baseline understanding of where we are at now with no changes to the profile of the inner harbor. The next thing that they would do is they would take some set of proposed designs and look at a combination of what we've already prepared for a design, but also look at some alternative designs that would achieve various levels of flood protection, maintain access, or address other goals that are presented to Harbor Development Committee and to the Board of Selectmen in terms of what we might be attempting to achieve with this project. So they would go through various alternative scenarios under those proposed conditions, and again, it's using the latest flood risk model and looking at what the change would be from the existing condition to the proposed condition in 2030, 2050, and 2070. Once they'd completed all of that modeling, they would use it to develop a new set of maps and then provide that information to us so that we could make further informed decisions, and that we would know that whatever we were proposing, we'd be able to identify the benefits and we'd be able to mitigate any perceived harms or some of the concerns that the Conservation Commission raised. So that's where we're at with Woods Hole Group.
Well, let me pick it up there if I can, JR. Barry, the problem is, of course, that Woods Hole is not yet engaged. We expect that they will be very shortly. Mm-hmm. But this work is going to take some time, and it is not going to be available, prior to, let's say, if we have an annual town meeting in the April timeframe as we would normally. It's not going to be here in time for that. So the question before us all is really, do we proceed with Article Z, and if so, how? What the Harbor Development Committee has talked about over the last several meetings is the validity of a sort of parallel track. And by that I mean, do we proceed with Article Z for the reasons that I'm going to articulate in a few moments and that I've spoken to previously? Take it obviously to yourselves, obviously to Advisory Committee. This is not an insubstantial project. The rough estimate of the dollars a year ago was about 5.3 million. We've been advised that an assumption of increase for inflation would be necessary. So we're probably talking 5.5, 5.6 million. You don't do that, lightly, obviously. But at the same time, continue forward with the permitting discussions and exercise with the Conservation Commission to address their concerns. I think the point is that if town meeting were to get to a point where it could approve the article at the suggested range of dollars of this plan, which has been developed over the last 3 years, nothing will actually happen, of course, until the permitting process is completed. It's my observation that this is not that unusual with town projects, that we may proceed with what we believe to be initially a design that's appropriate and useful and helpful for the reasons for the harbor itself and as well as for resiliency, an initial step in resiliency. But if there are changes that occur during the permitting process, obviously those are made before any construction dollars are actually spent. So I guess I would just put before all of us, and by the way, I should emphasize the dollar amount that I gave you would be before any grants that we might reasonably hope to receive, whether that's from the municipal vulnerability program at the state or the Fema or the Seaport Bond Council, all of which are potential sources for this kind of work. So if I thought about today effectively the elevator speech here of what are the pros and cons of deciding to pursue a parallel path, and it strikes me that the cons are you always want more information. You'd like more current information. You'd like more than you have now. And I want to emphasize that the Harbor Development Committee and myself personally, JR as well, all feel that way. Sure, you'd like to have perfect information. You'd like to have the most current information possible, but it does strike me that at some point you have to put a stake in the ground. You'd also like the entire plan. And we fully understand, and we've emphasized this to conservation, that this project for Town Pier and the parallel projects further down the road for veterans and mobile and barns they're part of a defense. It's a question of where do you set up your defense line, and it's pretty clear that it doesn't make sense simply to put up a defense line to protect the acre and a half of Town Pier itself. It itself is not valuable. It is valuable as part of a resiliency mitigator. You'd also, like to have a sense that what we're proposing, you'd like confidence that what we're proposing is a valuable part of that long-range plan, which will still need to be developed to address the issues further out in the time frame here. Our initial target was 2030, 2035, thinking about what do we do to make sure that this harbor front can be used by by citizens today, and at the same time be responsive to the challenge of climate change. I also, Mary, want to absolutely emphasize that the Harbor Development Committee is fully aware that the town has many important capital projects, whether it's Foster School or the public safety building. They're much bigger, but they're on the table as well, and we are very mindful that this is something that the advisory committee and the town is going to have to sort out. It seemed to us that our job is to bring this to you with our recommendation and our rationale, and then engage in the discussion, which is what the purpose of tonight is. So let me just summarize with what I perceive to be the pros, if you will, of proceeding with this. It's obvious we've deferred this a number of years. We first thought about some construction in 2018. Actually, there was a warrant article contingent on getting money from the Seaport Bond Council. We never did that. 2019, as we all know, we had the disruptions in the engineering department, and that we lost a year for that. A year ago in 2020, we were that close to proceeding with the article, and jointly, everyone concluded it made sense to step back. We did. We looked hard at the issues again, and concluded that we should continue. We're aware that the wharves continue to deteriorate, and an additional year will cause that to get worse. We know of the lease commitment at Barnes Wharf, where we have some responsibility to be thinking about what's going to happen for them and how that sinks in with their efforts and their plans. I'm also mindful, Mary, and I think we all are, that the possibility of infrastructure dollars coming from the federal government through to the state and through to towns like us could well be on the plate here in 2021. And I would not want to be precluded because we haven't got something kind of in the works that is can be used as matching dollars to what will be coming from the federal side. So our in summary, Harbor Development Committee believes that this project, protects a current asset, is a near-term answer to the issues that we're seeing in terms of safety and use of the harbor by all of its citizens, and is a helpful, positive initial step in the issues that we will have to address for resiliency going forward. We're fully mindful of that. The Woods Hole Group materials will help us and Concom make adjustments that might make sense for this proposed design, but we believe it is a strong start. So I'll stop there and open for questions of you and or the from you or the public.
Thank you, Bill. Just a couple quick questions. What is, based on what you know today, what is the anticipated timing of the Woods Hole report getting delivered to the town?
6 to 7 weeks after the approval of the letter to them. They've given us a proposal. We have not submitted our response.
So just hypothetically, if on March 1st, the town were to engage them, it would be
somewhere in the May timeframe, Mary, late May.
And then I'm sure there's some time to internalize. The other question, Bill, you mentioned potential funding sources, municipal vulnerability, FEMA, and Seaport Bond Council. Could you just refresh my memory? Are those, and it may be different, but with some of these, the town has to kind of demonstrate it has its share.
Yes.
But then, if you think about Foster School, which is another important capital project for the town, in the fall of 22, when we envision asking the town for money for Foster School, the way the MSBA program works, we have to actually get approval for the whole project. So if the school costs $70 million and the town is paying for 2/3 of it, town meeting has to authorize the full 70 to get going. How, with these other grant programs with matching and things, do we have to appropriate the entire $5.5 million, or do we just have to get our share?
I would analogize, Mary, to the dredging program, which we just went through 2 years ago, and we actually were dredged last year. And you'll recall that for that article, we asked for the entirety and asked for approval and an appropriation from the town for the entire amount, and then indicated that, of course, that amount would be reduced by anything that we received under any of these grant programs. You cannot, JR can correct me if I'm wrong, but none of these are going to give you kind of an advance approval prior to demonstrating that the town has skin in the game. And it is the evidence that we are prepared to move forward on this if we needed to on our own. But obviously, we are very desirous of taking advantage of any grant opportunities we have.
Because the devil's advocate would argue that if town meeting has authorized $5.5 million, does FEMA and Seaport Bond Council say, oh, the town has already approved this full money, they're prepared to pay the whole thing? Does that in any way diminish our chances of getting money?
Let me ask JR and or Alan, who's also on the call, because he's encountered this in his professional experience, if they would respond to that. I think the answer to that is no, but I want to let others who've been at this more frequently than I.
Thank you.
For both MVP and for the FEMA BRIC program, they do not take they do not take it as a negative that whether or not the town has appropriated money. What they look for, specifically what FEMA looks for, because we got fairly far through that application process, is that the basically that you meet their cost benefit criteria, and if you meet their cost benefit criteria, then then they're fully comfortable putting forward that money.
Yep, and the reason I ask, and Bill and Alan, you know this, asking town meeting to authorize $5.5 million versus, if it's a 50-50 match, because I think the voters understand that in authorizing that, we are saying we are prepared to, expend that full amount. So that's why I'm pushing a little on that. Alan, I didn't know if you had anything to add. I know you're familiar with Seaport Bond Council through all the great work on the bathhouse.
Yes, Mary. That is different in the sense, if you remember how we did the bathhouse, we get the seed money to do the engineering and the architectural work, and then we got the grant. So that's the positive news. You don't have to have all the money. Now, the downside is this is an awfully large appropriation of the Seaport Bond Council. So when we got 700,000, we were the third largest appropriation. A big appropriation from Seaport Bond Council is like $1.5 million. So I think scale-wise, FEMA or some of these climate change programs may be a better source.
Thank you. I think at this point, I'm going to ask Joe Fisher, who's the Selectman Liaison to the Harbor, for questions or comments relative to Article Z.
There we go. Well, first, there is no one who knows this project better or is a better advocate than Bill Reardon. The depth of his knowledge and his commitment to doing what's best for the town, it just can't be stated enough. So thank you, Bill. I know you've got a committee behind you, but you really have been more than the laboring oar. So thank you for your leadership.
Thank you.
I want to address a couple issues. First, the one that we were just talking about with respect to funding. One of the reasons last year when this came up that I expressed some concern is it wasn't clear to me to what extent we would qualify for funding opportunities, since the proposed elevation is below the FEMA base flood elevation. So that if we were proposing something 11 feet and it was below base flood elevation, did that disqualify or diminish our ability to seek those funds? And I know that's something that Bill, you and JR had looked at. I'm wondering if you could just comment now so the board can hear that.
I'd like JR to answer that because he is the one who's done the lion's share of the work on any of these grant opportunities.
So going through the grant process, there was no discount that was applied in the FEMA BRIC process with respect to not meeting BFE. BFE largely, in terms of the way it's regulated, is focused on occupied structures and isn't strictly something that regulates generalized flooding in an open area that might be a parking lot or a road or things of that nature. And it's a useful metric, but it doesn't govern the availability of funds when it comes to the protection of infrastructure.
Joe, I'm also remembering, I asked this question specifically of Beals and Thomas because you recall that they were the ones who helped the town prepare for MVP certification. And I'm recalling that the response in that situation was that if you were adding resiliency, they would look favorably on the project. There was not a hurdle rate.
One thing that you, Bill, that you didn't cover that was incredibly helpful to me is to explain the process of what it means actually to repair the wall and the dam that needs to be built. Because my initial reaction was, well, we can do this maybe part way and then come back and do an addition. And Bill, it was just an incredibly important fact to understand. If you could just demonstrate that or speak about it to the rest.
Sure, I will. Mary has seen slides that were presented at an earlier selectmen's meeting where Beals and Thomas came and made their presentation. But this runs to the issue of how much of the dollars go into simply, repair, let alone adding additional elevation, which is resiliency. The challenge here is to do these walls, and anyone who was here when Whitney Wharf was done knows that a contractor is going to come in. They're going to build a cofferdam around the entire town pier, and they're going to, quote, dewater, which means, the cofferdam will prevent the tide from coming in. They will take the existing wall entirely apart and preserve those granite blocks. They will then build a new substructure, a foundation. And we know from the borings, and this is a function of the history of Town Pier. Town Pier at one was a coal silo. And there were three very large coal silos, and prior to that, it was a wharf, for schooners in the lumber trade. Point is that it wasn't built, as a major structural thing, and there's not much underneath. So they will have to bring it all the way down, start with a concrete foundation in what will now be the dry seabed, and then build up from there with sufficient width, depth, if you will, going into Town Pier itself to support a wall of 11 feet plus the addition of potential 1.5 feet at a later time to get us to an elevation of 12.5. The issue is the upfront costs of bringing the barge in, the building of the cofferdam, the dewatering, all of that has to happen before you can even begin to build the wall back up again. It's a process that would probably, for Town Pier, JR, my sense is over a winter, starting in the fall and perhaps done sometime in the late spring.
It's about 3 months for them to get out of the water, basically.
Okay.
Yep.
So, John, I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, it's very, because my initial reaction was, well, why don't we just repair the pier? There's a question about what the height should be, so we can deal with that later. And the answer is no, you have to deal with it all right now, because you're not going to build the dam twice. And you need to make sure you have the right supporting infrastructure. So it's a question that Bill has appropriately put to us. In terms of the impacts of building a higher wall, one of the concerns that came up at the Conservation Commission meetings, and when I say meetings, I'm using that term loosely because there have been informal discussions with CONCOM members as well, is that if you create a pier, it may actually increase the velocity of water coming around that wall. And so you may have a surge of water coming onto land with a higher velocity, greater velocity than had you not built or reinforced the wall as was being proposed. That's a concern. I don't know, I'm not an expert in the science there, but I know that is something that was discussed. And the second related issue is, well, it's not just the velocity of the water coming into the town resources, but the wall may divert water to abutting property. And to what extent are we causing harm? Is there the possibility? And those two issues will be specifically looked at by the company. So those are concerns that have been raised. I think I'm accurate, Bill, in saying that at least some CONCOM members think that we need to hold off until we get that report before making an assessment about what makes sense. My own view is that we have been looking at this for an extended period of time, and that the numbers may change, but the need to repair that wall is now. And that to the extent that it winds up that we do not need to increase the height or that we need to increase it more, I would view that as a change order, if you will. It's a significant change order, but it's one that we can make down the road. And then it makes sense to start with a proposal that is as good as we can get now, recognizing that it may not be the best. There are clearly downsides in that. I mean, one alternative is after the science comes in, it may be that you don't do anything to the wall. You actually let it go away, and maybe the best thing to do is develop marshland around there. I'm not advocating that. I mean, there are a number of options that may be less costly to the town. I don't see us going in that direction. But I think that the wharf, it's clearly deteriorated and will continue to deteriorate. And we're not talking about a project that will go into the ground. We won't be doing work in calendar year 2021, in my view. And I would be surprised, tell me if I'm wrong, if we'd be doing it in 2022.
I would hope that we would be doing something in 2022. Chair, you can please correct me if I'm wrong, but the time.
Obviously, it's largely at this point contingent on the pace of permitting.
Yeah, and so I'm glad you said it. So this is a scope of work that is within the Conservation Commission jurisdiction. And right now, their bylaws would not allow this work to move forward. So Concom would need to change their bylaws to allow the project. And any approval that this board gave or a town meeting gave would be subject to receiving appropriate permitting. In addition to Concom, and I really haven't gone into this, do we need Army Corps of Engineering permits? I'm not, there's going to be a number of permits as well. So there are a lot of contingencies in place and time to adjust. So I think it'd be, others can ask questions, and then perhaps this meeting and then at another meeting, I'd like to have discussions with board members about what makes sense in terms of moving forward. But Bill, thank you. You have, it's the committee, but a lot of it, so much of it is you in terms of what you've done. So thank you.
Bill, questions or comments relative to Article Z?
So I want to echo Bill, Joe's thanks to you. I mean, you do have a great committee, but your leadership on this project and just for everything you've done down at the harbor has been wonderful. And thank you for your commitment to our serving the harbor and serving the town. So, you've convinced me that the need is there. It's compelling. This problem is not going away. I remember that picture from that nor'easter in 2018. I remember that storm. I remember seeing those pictures and thinking to myself, wow, I've never seen that before. Now it seems like every time we have, a bad nor'easter or a bad storm, people that becomes now a concern. The problem's only going to get worse. So I appreciate you kind of spearheading this effort and taking charge here. I guess my only concern is we have so many funding of many capital projects, and I think we as a board have to figure out the best way to fund this project and to address the problem. We do have to address it either this year or next year or soon. It's not going away. It's just we anticipate asking voters for a lot of capital needs in the near future. So we need to prioritize where this is going to be, and I think you've made a very compelling case that we do need to address this in the near future. So thank you.
Bill, as you walked through the chronology at the very beginning, I stepped into the seat I've had the privilege of holding at the very beginning of this. And you and the Harbor Development Committee, under your leadership, has taken a methodical, step-by-step approach. You know, you do a little work and you come in and talk to us. You know, we decided what are the priorities for the piers. What is the, you know, the forecast for design criteria? What is the elevation? And every step of the way was an opportunity to kind of socialize this, to talk about it, to kind of recheck our assumptions, and then make another decision. And I really appreciate the methodical way that you've been through this. I've heard people kind of recently, you know, make comments about how long it takes for, you know, town infrastructure projects to come to fruition. And yeah, it takes many, many years, but I actually think that, you know, some of the things we're talking about are pretty significant. And also as a municipality, we're trying to do this in a way that positions us to get, you know, assistance from the state, whether it's the MSBA or the Seaport Bond Council. So I really appreciate how methodical this has been. Tonight has given me a chance to, you know, refresh my memory on a lot of this, to hear some new information, which is really helpful. I agree with you that together we kind of have a decision point, which is, you know, is this the right time to go forward, understanding that town meeting is once a year. So if we get the Woods Hole information, you know, in the May timeframe, and we digest it, and in June we say, hey, we think we're good to go, we've just missed the window. Before I kind of complete my thoughts, I did have just a follow-up question. Joe mentioned that the Conservation Commission could not, under its bylaws right now, could not permit this project. So I think what I heard was that the remedy would be that would the Conservation Commission have to get some sort of town meeting approval?
No.
Or what would
do that, Mary? And
what is the remedy for that?
They have the ability to alter their own regulations.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
And it does not require town meeting approval, because I wanted to, in thinking about the parallel paths, if we needed that, I wanted to try to get that commitment and that into the works with this town meeting. But we concluded that it was not necessary, nor is any kind of state approval necessary.
Thank you. You know, the other thing that strikes me in this is, you know, Bill, you've brought pictures in, and the 2018 pictures are pretty significant, but let's also be very clear that these 100-year events are happening with a heck of a lot more frequency than 100 years.
Yes.
So, you know, this is not going away. And when you think about the potential flooding on 3A, and you think of the Mill Street sewer pumping station and the potential for flooding to infiltrate and get in the way of our sewer system, the consequences to the town could be really significant. What I'm trying to think about, and I'm finding tonight's conversation really helpful, is when I think about us taking this to town meeting, I want to do it when we are able to to allow this to go with its best foot forward and have the greatest chance of success with town meeting. And I'm sort of tossing that question around in my head as to, you know, when is the best time to do that. For all the reasons that my colleagues mentioned, this issue isn't going away. We've been methodically working through it. Data will continue to inform, but we have the ability to pivot and adjust. By the same token, and like, I'll just be really direct, we got a lot of really angry citizens out in our community right now. People are raw and angry because of COVID. The vitriol, the mean-spiritedness, and and some of the behavior that I've seen as we've talked about town finances and projects is unlike anything I've seen before. I just, the vitriol is, I can't even put words around it. And what I would hate to see is a project that so many dedicated, hardworking citizens have worked on for so many years get caught up in some of that. And I'm really wrestling with that. I'm wrestling with it on a couple of fronts. And while I certainly always try to do what I think is in the best interests of the town, and I'm just struggling again with kind of what is the right thing, because I think with any project, a no vote from town meeting is then just makes the next decision tougher. So I'm not in a position to make any decisions tonight, but I just this is one that I am really struggling with, and you know, I would invite you and your fellow committee members, you know, any information or thoughts or perspective that you want to share either tonight or after this meeting, to just kind of toss this around further. I'm happy to do that, because I think this is an important infrastructure project for the town. So I'll kind of pause there.
Could I make just two observations, Mary? Because you've made some very telling points, and I am fully aware of the sentiment that is in the town and how difficult this could be. I will tell you that at our meeting, when we voted in January, should we proceed with this or not, we had a bit of that conversation ourselves in terms of saying, look, you don't want to go in, and we know that there are so many uncertainties around a project like this, that there is the possibility that you go forward and it is rejected. Now we'll have a proxy with the advisory committee, and I see that our advisory liaison, Libby Claypool, is on the call. We've been in close touch with her. We'll meet with them. That will give us a different sense. You know, the three of you obviously are part of that. There will be additional opportunities for socialization. The only other thing I want to really emphasize, Mary, and this came out, I see Lonnie Fournier is on the call as well. We do not want to sell this as this will answer our flooding issues, because we are fully aware that this is part of a layered defense that ultimately may involve something along with 3A itself. Could be a Jersey barrier-like thing from Ship Street to the Rotary, with all kinds of views in terms of whether that's a good idea. You know, our decision and our recommendation was in part based on the balance between safety, dollars, and aesthetics. We didn't think Fortress Hingham with an 8-foot addition to the wall was the right view. Not very welcoming to boaters coming. But so anyway, I just want to whatever we do in going forward, we will be sure to emphasize that this is the beginning of the longer term to address serious sea level rise and storm surge.
Thank you. And you know, just in response, I do think that will be helpful, because I think you know, setting aside some of the unique circumstances that the pandemic has created, with any article like this, there is always the question of, do we have enough information, and are we ready for prime time? And that's again part of what I'm tossing around in my head. And I would just also add, for the benefit of my colleagues and the viewing audience, that as we've had conversations over the years with the Harbor Development Committee, one of the things we've talked about is, you know, do we go to town meeting and ask for funding to do this in pieces, or do we ask for the funding in aggregate? Because in some cases, doing things together does create some cost synergies that, you know, your committee's pointed out to us over the years. the direction we've taken, and again, we appreciate the harbor development being responsive and sensitive to the many capital needs in the town, was to say, hey, let's kind of do this at a piece at a time, because our sense was that Bill Ramsey, to your point, we thought we might be able to kind of fit these in a little bit better, as opposed to asking for the entire thing. So, I think that this conversation is very helpful. And, maybe at this point I would open it up. I don't know if anyone in the public has any questions or wishes to make any comments relative to Article Z. Okay, seeing none, Bill, I don't know if you or any member of your committee has anything else that you want to add. I think we'll be in touch as far as a follow-up meeting for further discussion and vote. Anything else to add? I see
Marco.
Yeah, Marco, welcome. If you could just give us your name and address for the record, that would be great.
Yep. Marco Bohr, 33 Elm Street. I'm a member of the Hingham Harbor Development Committee. I just wanted to amplify two things. One is the primary reason for the urgency is safety. So the walls have started to crumble. Thankfully, the DPW was able to fill in some of those gaps that had occurred behind the wall so that pedestrians wouldn't fall in. So there's a time sensitivity issue to it. And secondly, we are very aware, right, of the need to get funding from state grants and the likes. I am led to believe, and JR could either confirm or negate this, but that we have to build it to 11 feet. And we've had some really heated, contentious discussions about that. But at that 11 feet level, that allows you to open up more grant opportunities. But as you know, there's no guarantees, right? So we won't know until the whole project has been funded. So, getting the ball rolling now, it's one of these mixed messages, right? We want the town to appropriate it now, knowing that we're not going to spend the money until 2022 at earliest, and maybe even later than that. But if we're not ready, and we miss some of these grants, because there's a cap, right, to the amount of grant money that the state and the Fed offers every year, we might miss that window. So it's a really delicate balance. I totally understand your conundrums with all these other capital needs. So anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Marco. Bill, anything else to close up?
No, I don't think so. Mary, I've tried to, I have been dealing with exactly what you've been thinking through. And that's why in the end, I chose to sort of present it as the pros and the cons. Yep. I've been thinking and working this issue through for so many years that I know I may sometimes be kind of emotionally involved in it, but I'm not so much so that I'm not objective in understanding the town has got to decide on its priorities. And it's our job to bring this forward as what we perceive to be a significant priority, but ultimately advisory, selectmen, the town itself is going to have to make that decision. We think there are reasons that would augur well to go for it this year, knowing that we won't be spending the money until we're ready to.
Yeah, and sometimes when we discuss and we listen to each other and we kick around pros and cons in a constructive way, that's when we all make the best decision for the town. We do it in our committees, we do it in hearings like this, we do it on the floor of town meeting, and I do think that the strength of this community is that each year we try to help different things, as many possible things take a step forward as possible. And I appreciate the committee's sensitivity to all the other things going on at the town, as well as your very strong responsibility to the harbor, which is what we've asked you to do.
our mission.
You know, as every year we all have to balance, and I think this year is the same. Chair, something else?
Yeah, just one brief thing, more of an editorial comment than an engineering comment. Bill, a passion to do what you believe is right is never a bad thing.
Agreed.
Thank you, Jay.
I would also say that Bill Reardon is one of the best examples in this community about having that passion and taking a total town, we are one community view. And I know I've benefited from that perspective as I've sat in my chair, and I continue to be grateful for it.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you all.
Mary, Libby Claypool has her hand up.
I think she's clapping, Bill.
Oh, okay.
I think it's like a reaction. So.
All right. I'll accept that.
Yep, because I think I usually get a little elbow when somebody's got their hand up. Okay, so that concludes warrant articles for this evening. We've got a couple other important pieces of business. Next on the agenda is to sign an agreement with the Teamsters Local Union 25 Public Works. Michelle, could you just give a quick overview of the vote before the board?
Sure, Mary, thank you. So back in December, the board considered and approved the memorandum of agreement between the town and the Teamsters Local 25 Union, which is our DPW staff. That agreement extends the current collective bargaining agreement through June 30th, 2021, and will implement a 2% wage increase. Back in December, Jack Manning came on behalf of the Personnel Board to summarize those negotiations, and now the contract has been ratified by the union. So tonight is just for the board's signature to confirm that we are moving forward.
Great. Bill or Joe, any questions for Michelle?
I have no questions. I remember our last discussion on this matter.
No questions.
Same for me. Anyone in the public have a question with respect to the agreement with the Teamsters Union? Okay, seeing none, I would accept a motion.
I'd make a motion to sign the agreement with the Teamsters Local Union 25 Public Works staff effective July 1, 2020 through June 30th, 2021.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, Joe?
Aye.
Bill?
Aye.
Mary? Aye. Thank you. Next on the agenda is Inside Town Finances, Volume 6. Michelle, I think you've got this. Thank you. So this week's Inside Town Finances volume is actually talking about fund balance. This is something that we've talked about quite a bit in our last couple meetings when we reviewed the fund balance memo, as we're talking about the potential use of fund balance to support our operating budgets. So hopefully this is timely. Michelle, if you could go to the next slide. Fund balance is the accumulation of every fiscal year's actual surpluses and deficits. And changes to fund balance are the result of one-time occurrences. The amounts vary from year to year. Sometimes there's a lot of budget surpluses and fund balance goes up. In some years, we don't have a lot of budget turnbacks, but we have a lot of snow removal and fund balance goes down. Several years ago, our snow and ice snow removal costs were almost $2 million. So fund balance actually dropped that year because of that. So if the surpluses exceed the deficits, it goes up. If not, it goes down. This is just a pictorial view of the information that our town accountant, Sue Nickerson, presented to the board a few weeks ago. Our total fund balance is about $43 million. And back in 2011, the Government Accounting Standards Board basically said to communities, you can't just report one number for fund balance, you have to break it out into 5 categories. And actually Hingham only has 4 of those 5 categories. So those are the slices of the pie chart. Restricted, committed, assigned, and unassigned fund balance. Restricted, committed, and assigned fund balance, those are basically, that's fund balance money that has some sort of either a restriction or a commitment on it. So when we think about our town's rainy day fund, it's actually that big green part of the pie. It's the unassigned fund balance, which as of the end of this year totaled about $30.1 million. Michelle, can you go to the next slide? So how much fund balance are we supposed to have? Well, again, with this accounting change, our town financial policy was modified to say that our unassigned fund balance, which is that red dashed line, should be between 16 to 20% of our total annual expenditures. So the way I like to think of this is, if you read in the Boston Globe, they say, a household should have 6 months of living expenses in its rainy day fund. The analogy for the town of Hingham is 16 to 20% of annual expenditures. And as of 2020, we're at about 25.3%. So we're above that threshold. We're actually about $6 million above the upper limit. I am going to direct your attention. If you look at that red line, you'll notice that in the 1990s going into 2000, it was in the 20 to 25% range. And then what you'll notice is in sort of 2000, it started dropping. And in 2009, you see it was at about 8%. And at that time, the town was actually refinancing $75 million in debt. And every time we go out to the market to finance, to borrow money or refinance, we get a credit rating. And Moody's, one of the rating agencies, actually gave the town a negative outlook, which is basically a warning that says, unless you do some things differently, we're going to downgrade your credit. And the primary reason for the negative outlook was because the town had eroded its reserves. And what the town had been doing in the 9 years preceding that was there wasn't enough money to balance the operating budget, so we'd go into fund balance. We would use it to fund capital outlay, and then we would take the capital outlay money and use it for other things. And, I'll get into this in a future series, but our AAA bond rating has saved us millions of dollars over the years. And in fact, without a AAA bond rating, we wouldn't have been able to borrow money to build East School in 2008 because the credit markets were frozen to all but the AAA communities. So that's kind of what, a little bit of a history of our fund balance. Michelle, if you could go to the next slide. So what can we use our excess fund balance for? We got about $6 million excess. Well, we have a town financial policy. It's on the website under the advisory committee. And the policy says acceptable uses of fund balance are for unfunded liabilities, long-term and non-recurring capital expenditures. That word non-recurring is important. Retirement of debt or targeted tax relief. And the financial policy, basically, it also says that excess fund balance should not be used for recurring operating budget expenses. And that was actually put into place after that experience in 2009, when the town was using it for operating budget expenses and our fund balance depleted. And in fact, in 2009, Moody's basically said, what will cause your rating to move down? And it said, well, you're going to get downgraded if you adopt a structurally imbalanced budget, or if you have significant appropriations out of your free cash without replenishment. So again, this was a little bit of a shot across the bow to say to the town, these practices, these practices are not consistent with what AAA bond communities do. Michelle, if you could go to the next slide. So I'm just going to give you an example of why the financial policy limits it. If you look at the top half of the screen And I pulled these numbers from the town forecast. So if you look right now, look in FY22, which is the second column, you see that $7 million deficit? You see that? Michelle, I don't know if you can point to it. Because I can point, yeah, right there. So again, as we saw in our forecast 2 weeks ago, right now our forecast is showing a deficit of $7 million. And if you look up at the line above, you'll see that our revenues are down a little from 21 to 22, but our expenses are going up. So let's, and then I've got fiscal year 23 and 24 on the screen. So let's say we take $7 million to balance the FY22 budget. If you look down at the bottom, that number in red, 136.9 million, we've used $7 million to balance the budget in FY22. So we have a balanced budget, but look at FY23 and FY24. We've got budget deficits in excess of $7 million. So what would we have to do in 23? Well, we might have to go into fund balance even more. Another $7 million would, you know, if you think about that graph, our funding levels would drop quite a bit. The other thing we might have to do is go to the town and say, if we want to maintain services, we're going to need an override. And, you know, it's possible, but I would also say that I think it's that the town has been successful when it's gone to the voters and said, we would like your permission for an override to fund these additional services, as opposed to saying, you know, we have to have one or we'll cut services. You know, the other option, which the town faced in 2009, and which we did, we had to reduce services. And we're going to start to get into this in future weeks, but our local government is a people-intensive business, and about 80% of the costs, you know, for the municipal and for the schools are personnel. So if you're talking about reducing services, that has the potential to mean layoffs and furloughs, and I know that's something that none of us would like to see. Next slide, Michelle. So, how can we use fund balance during the pandemic? If you look on the left-hand side, this year, town meeting authorized using $3.3 million for temporary revenue replacement. While the policy doesn't specify that use, the fact that it was temporary after consultation with our financial advisors suggested to us that it was consistent with the policy. As we think about FY22 and the decisions ahead for the town, you know, there are some potential uses for fund balance. Similar to what we did in this fiscal year, we could look at temporary revenue replacement. Just as an example, our meals tax revenue was over $800,000 a year before the pandemic. Next year, we're carrying a number in the forecast that's $600,000. We think it will rebound, but we don't think it will rebound all the way back. Could we say we're going to use $200,000 of fund balance for temporary revenue replacement for meals tax? I think we couldn't be in compliance with the policy. And I think there are other places that we could do that. The other potential application would be non-recurring pandemic-related expenses. One-time expenses that maybe, you know, wouldn't be eligible for CARES Act funding. Again, the concept here that's in keeping with the financial policy is non-recurring or temporary. So, you know, that's just kind of an overview of what fund balance is, how much we have, what is our target, how are we doing against our target, and what the policy calls for in terms of potential uses of fund balance and how we might use it for FY22. A one-pager similar to what we've done in the past will be up on the town website tomorrow that'll, you know, take some of this information and just formatted into a one-page document that people can view. Bill or Joe, I don't know if you have any questions about fund balance.
Nope, that was great.
Just one, Mary, that was great. Just one quick question. For snow removal costs, I know you said they come out of fund balance. I remember earlier learning that we can actually deficit spend for snow removal costs. So I'm assuming it comes out of unassigned?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And you know what happens, Bill, is typically what we do is at the very end of the year we look at all our budgets, and if we have surpluses in one department and maybe, you know, a potential deficit in snow and ice, we might first look to see if we can move some of that money into public works to pay for the snow and ice. But if we don't have enough to cover it, it comes out of the unassigned fund balance. And, you know, if you think about this year, Randy's crew has been pretty busy since the end of January. You know, we exhausted our snow and ice budget weeks ago. So it's, you know, it's likely that we're deficit spending right now in snow and ice. So we're going to have to find a way to make that up, either through budget surpluses in other departments or through a draw from fund balance.
This is the first time in my life that I've ever experienced snow and start thinking about the cost it's going to cost to shovel the roads and see it out.
Not as fun. It's not as fun. Randy once told me that an inch of snow is about $100,000. So, you know, like a 10-inch snow event, you're like, oh my gosh, this is, and don't quote me on that, but yeah.
At least we're not Buffalo, Mary.
It's and I would also say that for Randy and his crew, it's also not necessarily accumulation. If you think about the last few days with the freezing and the trucks being out and throwing down the salt and throwing down the sand, you know, it's also treatment of streets and sidewalks to keep them safe. Any questions from the public on inside town finances? Okay, next on the agenda is COVID-19 update. Tom?
Great. Thank you, Mary. So the COVID-19 update for today, February 16th. According to the public health data from the Massachusetts Department of Public Health released last week, the town's designation remains yellow, indicating a medium risk of spread in the community. The average daily incidence rate for the town of Hingham is 39.0 per 100,000 residents. Our percent positivity rate was 3.86% for the previous 14 days. Even though these numbers are lower than what was reported for our community last week, Hingham's average daily incidence rate and percent positivity rate are higher than the state's averages for this reporting period, indicating a need for continued vigilance. According to the DPH, there have been 131 new cases of COVID-19 in Hingham over the past 14 days. There have been a total of 1,479 cases in Hingham since the start of the pandemic. As of today, confirmed COVID-19 cases in Massachusetts have risen to 531,702. So I have a new category this week called virus variants. This is a big issue for a lot of people, and we want to make sure that we pass along the information that we have. So the DPH continues to conduct surveillance for COVID-19 variants of concern, which include the 3 that were first identified in the United Kingdom, South Africa, and Brazil, respectively. Surveillance data so far has identified the UK variant in Massachusetts, but does not indicate that it is widespread at this time. It is critical that we do everything possible to minimize the spread of this variant and other variants of concern. Per the CDC, so far, studies suggest that antibodies generated through vaccination with currently authorized vaccines recognize these variants. This is being closely investigated and more studies are in fact underway. Public health risk reduction measures remain the same. Please continue to wear masks or face coverings while in public, maintain 6 feet of social distancing, and stay home when you're sick. And get tested if you have symptoms or are identified as a close contact. The Empathy Testing Center at 308 Cushing Street remains open Mondays through Saturdays from 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. Testing appointments can be easily scheduled online at www.mpathy.org. So regarding the vaccine rollout, at this time, all phase 1 priority groups, as well as individuals aged 75 and older, are eligible to receive the vaccine in Massachusetts. According to DPH's daily COVID-19 vaccine report, a total of 861,859 first doses and 304,657 second doses have been administered in Massachusetts as of today. That's 76.4% of the total doses shipped to our state have been reported as administered. Local vaccine distribution is dependent on receiving doses from the DPH. Unfortunately, our most recent requests for vaccine doses have not been fulfilled. The Hingham Health Department continues to request vaccines from the state each week. We will need to wait until we are provided with more doses before we can schedule additional clinics in Hingham. We will release details on future vaccination clinics as soon as additional doses are received. In the meantime, if you can access a COVID-19 vaccine through other means, you should do so. We encourage eligible residents to make an appointment at one of the vaccination sites around the region. Information on available clinics and eligibility requirements can be found at mass.gov by clicking the COVID link. Last week, DPH announced that vaccine appointments were available at CVS pharmacies around the Commonwealth through the Federal Retail Pharmacy Program. Please visit www.cvs.com to schedule an appointment. The closest participating CVS pharmacies include CVS locations in Weymouth and Braintree. If you end up receiving the vaccine through another organization and no longer need to be on the Town of Hingham list, please let us know by emailing covidquestions@hingham-ma.gov. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you. Joe, questions for Tom?
Yes, I do. First, Tom, I don't know if you saw it, but that today the state announced its first confirmed case of the South Africa COVID-19 variant. It was in Middlesex County.
Okay.
So that just hit the press relatively recently. And then with respect to the availability of vaccines, is Hingham's experience consistent with the experience of our neighboring towns in terms of ability to receive the vaccine from the state, or are we more or less favorable than the other communities?
Yes, it's exactly consistent with what all the other local communities are seeing in terms of their local vaccination clinics. So unfortunate, but that seems to be the direction the state has decided to go, at least here in the short term. We don't know what their long-term plans are with vaccine distribution.
And then the question that I've been getting is, even though Hingham is not, or the state is not currently allowing the next tier to be vaccinated, named 65 and older, when will Hingham start registering those folks so that when it's allowed, the process will be in place so they can get their vaccinations?
It's a good question. I'll bring it up to the command group in a meeting tomorrow, and I'll speak with Susan Sarney, obviously.
Great, thank you. Great job. No other questions.
Thank you.
Bill?
Tom, what vaccine is the town giving out? Is it the Moderna?
Yeah, it is Moderna, yes.
Okay, that's what I thought. I was asked that question this week, and I didn't have a definitive answer, so thank you.
What we are looking into, Bill, we are asking the questions of DPH of what it would it increase our ability to get vaccine if we had our vaccinators trained in both Pfizer and Moderna. And we'll see what the answer we get back. We asked the question today. Hopefully we'll get an answer tomorrow. We will do everything we can to get to convince the state that we're worthy of being given the vaccinations. So.
Great, thank you.
Tom, thank you. How many, approximately approximately how many people age 75 and older are on the wait list that the town has established? Do we know?
My understanding is it's over 1,000. Michelle, is that consistent with what you understand?
I think that's correct.
Yeah. So we got a ways to go here.
Yeah.
I am glad that you continue to urge those who are eligible to receive the vaccine to seek alternate locations, because the priority here is getting everybody vaccinated as quickly as possible. And from what I've been reading, it seems like a lot of the supply is being directed towards the large vaccination centers. I think the nearest one to Hingham is probably Gillette Stadium.
Right.
Any members of the public have any questions with respect to the COVID-19 update? Okay, seeing none. Public comment on items not on the agenda? Okay, Selectmen Town Administrator reports. Michelle?
Nothing, thank you.
Tom?
Just a very brief one, Mary. A couple of weeks ago, we had talked about releasing a financial reporting model that the town was working on. We are nearing completion of that model. It looks like it should be ready next week or so.
Thank you. Anything else?
That's it.
Joe?
Nothing to report. Thank you for handling a great meeting this evening.
Actually, just one last thing. I'm sorry. Thank you, Joe. Just real quick, Mary, one last thing I forgot to mention. I think it's important to note that while we appointed a police chief today, that is great news for us as a community, but really especially for the police department. Those officers, I think they believe in Dave. They're looking forward to working for him for a long time as their chief, and I'm very happy for them. I'm looking forward to working with Dave for a long time to come. So they do great work over there, and I'm very happy that now we have solid leadership for the foreseeable future.
Thank you. Bill, anything to report tonight?
Nothing to add.
No, I echo Tom's remarks. So we're closing by echoing. Our next meeting is scheduled for next Tuesday, February 23rd. I believe that is going to be a joint meeting with our advisory committee and school committee colleagues. So that agenda will be posted on Friday. So with that, I would accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, Joe?
Aye.
Bill?
Aye.
Mary? Aye.